Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Dr. Rajendra Kumar.
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Welcome to this joint meeting.
Yeah,
We're just waiting for Mr. Amitabh Kant to join. His office has checked in, but
no, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, you are there. So then we can begin. Sir, can we begin?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Sir, so good afternoon, everyone. And, we are very delighted to have all of you on board. Chairman, sir, Mr. Mishra, our chief guest for this afternoon, Mr. Amitabh Kant, Dr. Rajendra Kumar, the additional secretary in MeitY, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Mr. Dilip Sahni, representing CII, our partner for this event, and all the very distinguished participants and panelists. This is, my distinct privilege to welcome you all this afternoon on behalf of both the organizers, ISID and CII, to discuss some issues of great contemporary relevance on Industry 4.0 and how we can leverage it for India's development. As we know that this new emerging technology, which is sometimes called as Industry 4.0 or digital revolution, and which includes all different things such as the artificial intelligence, blockchain, 3D printing, and whole range of issues, Internet of Things and all that, which are finding applications in all different sectors, including manufacturing, including in health sector, including in governance and all different things. We will hear from the experts today, but it also is something which could destroy many jobs, and that for a country like India passing through a youth bulge in its demographic transition could be a challenge. So we need to discuss and debate and identify policy options that will help us to maximize the potential and opportunities and help us to minimize the threats. So that is the discussion of this afternoon. And we are delighted that we have all of you on board, including Mr. Amitabh Kant, CEO of NITI Aayog, and who has been, sort of shaping a lot of government policy and ideas about harnessing the potential of this technology revolution. And since time is very short and the agenda is packed, I would not spend any more of your time, and I would request our chairman, Mr. S.K. Mishra, to deliver his opening remarks and invite Mr. Kant with the remarks. Over to you, sir.
My good friend Amitabh Kant, Dr. Rajendra Kumar, Mr. Dilip Sahni, distinguished panelists and participants. It is my present duty to welcome you to the discussions this afternoon at the Roundtable, centered on opportunities and challenges arising out of digital technology as applied to industry. I'm particularly happy to see the Roundtable bringing together policymakers with representatives of industry, think tanks, and international agencies. It is only by sharing thoughts and perspectives that we can have a truly meaningful dialogue on issues of contemporary relevance. The first industrial revolution, beginning at the end of the 18th century, brought mechanization and traditional industries. 1 century later, the second industrial revolution brought massive technological developments from which most modern industries emerged. Fast forward to the late 20th century, and the third industrial revolution brought us electronics, telecommunications, and computers. Each of these changed lives dramatically. Now, the fourth industrial revolution, which we are calling Industry 4.0, is applying new technology to manufacturing and industry. It is influencing our life in countless ways. Through the use of information technology, for instance, we can interact with people located in any part of the world the way we are doing in today's discussion on the Zoom platform. In Industry 4.0, computers are being used to create intelligent machines that can outperform human beings certain activities.
हाँ?
Industries are undergoing automation,
Webinar चल रहा है.
installing,
I'll just see a little bit.
manufacturing, or moving heavy materials. Machines with artificial intelligence are capable of responding on their own without human instructions. Drones are being used to monitor flood-affected areas or to check groundwater quality. These new technologies can allow us to use resources efficiently and reduce waste and leakage. They help us in detecting disease and in responding to public health emergencies. All bring significant positive changes to our lives. Within industries, many tasks can shift from manual labor to automation. This, along with increased safety levels and the ability to monitor every discrepancy or fault, can be of great benefit to those employed. We've also to keep in mind that new technologies may displace people from their jobs. Many jobs will no doubt disappear, but we will gain new jobs with new skills. This is perhaps inevitable cost of adapting new technology. Such fears, if one recalls, were expressed when computers first made their appearance, but the world adapted. And now every young person understands the need to become computer savvy. So it is the responsibility of all involved, government and industry, to provide the training that will give new skills to those who are made redundant, enabling them to remain secure and employed in this changing world. Also, some feel that new technologies that suit advanced economies may not be equally applicable to developing countries. On the other hand, 4.0 technology can ultimately boost the efficiency and profitability of operations, making them much more competitive. This is badly needed by industry in India today and will ultimately benefit the entire population. Our policy interventions thus need to incentivize innovation within the Indian context. And I hope we'll be able to provide answers to the challenges that lie ahead. I'm happy that Mr. Amitabh Kant has found time to join us for this policy discussion. As Chief Executive of Niti Aayog, he is keenly contributing to shaping of government policy on the Industry 4.0. I'm sure that his keynote will set the tone of our discussion. With these words, I invite Amitabh to take the floor for his keynote address. Thank you.
Mr. S.K. Mishra, Professor Nagesh Kumar, Director of ISID, Mr. Dilip Sahni, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed panelists, I'm absolutely delighted to address this roundtable. The COVID-19 pandemic is a black swan event like no other. Globally, it has deeply impacted almost every aspect of human life and has presented unprecedented challenges. Consequently, the economic shocks have been felt throughout the globe, leading to the slowdowns which have had a cascading impact on industry and manufacturing as well. India has demonstrated great resilience and perseverance in overcoming the challenges brought upon by this pandemic, which has particularly disrupted manufacturing supply chains. Sustaining India's economic growth is going to be a key factor in cushioning the impact of COVID-19. The industry and manufacturing sector is to play a key role in India's path to recovery. As per a McKinsey report, the manufacturing sector has the potential to generate 1.25 trillion of GDP by 2030, more than double the 500 billion it accounted for in 2020. And presently, the manufacturing sector accounts for only 17.4% of the GDP. Now, there is a lot of potential for the sectors to grow further and contribute in a bigger way to the GDP. There are several key sectors where the Indian manufacturing value chains have attained various levels of global competitiveness, such as vehicle and vehicle components, capital goods and machine tools, pharmaceuticals, chemical and allied products, metal and basic metals, renewable energy, electronics, and aerospace and defense. Amongst these opportunity areas, some of these value chains are mature and need to be scaled up. Some cater to the domestic markets but need to be transformed in order to address the global markets, and some value chains here are sunrise sector. Scaling these manufacturing value chains can add up to 320 billion more to the gross value addition. In addition, the government has also undertaken a slew of reforms and developed new schemes to give this manufacturing a boost. Special schemes such as the production-linked incentive targeting some of the sunrise sectors in India has further given the manufacturing sector a much-needed boost. While there is significant opportunity for growth in the manufacturing sector for India to be globally competitive, one of the key factors is increasing productivity. But for us to remain competitive and to achieve such targets, this can only happen if modern technology is optimally and effectively leveraged. This is why the importance and relevance of Industry 4.0 technologies cannot be overstated. Deployment and application of these technologies can lead to a wide range of transformations, from production efficiency to product customization, creation of new businesses, greater effectiveness in service delivery, and getting products to market faster. Given the potential for increases in productivity, it is imperative that Industry 4.0 technologies are adopted in an accelerated manner for India to be globally competitive. Industry 4.0 linked adoption and automation can create greater efficiency. And one study by McKinsey has noted that close to 60% of manufacturing sector output in India could leverage predictive maintenance, smart design. These interventions in turn can lift productivity in plants and factories by 7 to 11%. For workers who are attached to these roles, there would be requirement for retraining and redeployment. The mainstreaming of Industry 4.0 technologies will allow Indian manufacturing to truly leapfrog technologically in terms of technology adoption as well as in terms of increased efficiency and productivity. Industry 4.0 helps create a level playing field, especially for those countries that missed the early waves of automation and industrialization. Despite the promise that it holds, there are several challenges, and I'll list some of them. First is availability of data, where a lot of traditional industries have not undergone digitization. As a result, not only are they not able to leverage any potential Industrial Revolution 4.0 benefit, but it becomes difficult for the AI solutions to be developed for the unique sector-specific challenges and use cases without the availability of this data. As a result, there is a need for increased digitization. Otherwise, there'll be high barrier for entry of applying innovations. Secondly, lack of awareness with respect to use cases. At the industry level, there is a significant lack of awareness of what exactly are the opportunities and solutions that may be available and applicable to them. There needs to be greater emphasis on creating awareness, especially in the level of MSMEs, who have an especially important role in the context of impact or growth potential. For a lot of businesses, management buy-in is required to allocate resources to Industry 4.0 implementation. However, limited awareness leads to limited interest. Thirdly, affordability and funding. High investment cost, barrier to entry cost can be a deterrent and a barrier to entry. Some of the technologies require a lot of investment, and without liquidity, it is difficult to adopt. This is especially true from the context, in the context of the MSME perspective, and it is important that MSMEs become a key driver of technology in India. Fourthly, I think quite often we get stuck at pilot scale. Given the unique and niche requirements, there aren't always ready solutions that can be applied on a cookie cutter basis. As a result, solutions need to be customized and developed from scratch. Not all initiatives achieve the desired level of success, or sometimes the initiative gets stuck at pilot stage and is not subsequently scaled up. Some of the solutions developed have IP attached to them and cannot necessarily be scaled or applied beyond the specific example. Fifthly, reskilling and training infrastructure. Deployment of Industry 4.0 often requires complete reskilling of existing workers, and this is a must. And then a lot of technology needs to be developed or imported by companies, as a result of which sometimes the cost with deployment can be high. A range of measures would have to be undertaken to holistically address the challenges of adoption. Firstly, We need to identify priority sectors, use case-based approach, based on the evaluation of maturity of value chains and growth potential, as well as impact potential from successful deployment of Industry 4.0. Priority areas for promotion of IR 4.0 can potentially be supported by the government, and support may be specially be provisioned for SMEs. Secondly, we need rapid digitization and retrofitting program. Companies will have to revisit and develop strategy for rapid digitization, which will allow them to obtain a greater Industry 4.0 readiness level. And this will be especially important in the context of MSMEs, which are in a high growth, high impact sector with a proven record of availability of IR 4.0 solutions. SMEs and priority sectors can be incentivized through new schemes to help adopt this. Thirdly, access to industry-specific data and foundational data sets is key to building industry-specific solutions, tools, and platforms. Additionally, there need to be solutions marketing which make the solution discovery process easier. And fourthly, development of local technology companies and solution needs to be encouraged. The global market for Industry 4.0 is growing at a CAGR of 17.06% and is expected to be $205.24 billion by 2025. This is a great opportunity for startups not only to cater to the huge domestic market, but to also start delivering solutions to other countries. In this regard, schemes to promote local startup can have a multiplier impact in the larger ecosystem. And then there is a need for academia and industry collaboration platforms. Local solutions and R&D can be realized with closer cooperation between the private sector and the academic applied research entities. Schemes have to be deployed to especially support MSMEs, access finance for investing in IR 4.0 interventions. These can be prioritized based on identified priority sectors. A concerted effort to raise awareness through creation of facilitation centers throughout the country, which will help awareness pertaining to high impact sectors and use cases. All existing technology centers of MO, Ministry of Small and Medium Enterprises, can be retrofitted to also provide Industry 4.0 facilitation support. Thus, rapidly scaling from the existing 2 centers. Establishing a larger number of technology facilitation centers will be important if scale and reach has to be extended. And then scaling through standards. Development of standards and guidance documents can help streamline and standardize adoption along for greater scale. I'm also of the view that a national program would have to be developed to ensure that the reskilling of the workforce is carried out systematically and strategically, converging with the existing skilling programs. The creation of lighthouses and lighthouse showcases are an important source of learning, especially for businesses which will get stuck in the pilot phase. Development of more lighthouses in India will be necessary in order to achieve the desired level of awareness. Tata Steel project at Kali Ganga Nagar is the largest single location greenfield steel project in India, spread over 3,000 acres in the state of Orissa. It joined the World Economic Forum's Global Lighthouse Network along with Tata Steel's IJ Muiden plant in the Netherlands, which is already a member of this network of being the most advanced in Industry 4.0. The Government of India recognizes the importance that Industry 4.0 holds. Several government initiatives have been designed and conceived to promote Industry 4.0 adoption in India. These programs and interventions have been carried by different ministries of the government. There is, however, much more work to be done, especially with respect to identifying the existing bottlenecks and other nuanced factors. Niti Aayog is working in close partnership with CII to establish technology capability centers, which will integrate and coordinate all the various government initiatives, as well as leverage private sector support to take forward the IR 4.0 technology adoption program. The platform can become a hub of collaboration between academia and private sector. Under the Digital India program, there's a great push to ensure that necessary infrastructure relating to broadband internet connectivity is available in the most remote part of the country. And this will help address legacy problems with respect to access to connectivity, infrastructure, and remote manufacturing. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the way forward? India is well positioned to change the manufacturing sector and upgrade MSMEs. We have a rich talent pool from the IITs, triple IITs, NITs, And we'll also have various ITIs which can help upskill workers from the future of workers perspective. IR 4.0 will help create new kinds of jobs. With the right skilling pipeline for factory workers, we can propel ourselves to greater height. The key to success and greater adoption, however, depends on one thing. It has to be industry driven. It cannot be government driven. Government can support, but that government interest to support will be provided. We envision that for the adoption to be truly successful, it has to be championed by the private sector. Especially the larger companies will have an advantage over smaller ones with respect to access to capital as well as capacity for implementation. And hence, they have a great role to play in helping the larger ecosystem of smaller companies and MSMEs. The private sector will have an intricate understanding of the challenges and nuances that can contribute to successful adoption. We are living in truly exciting times, and the pace of development of technology is highly unprecedented. How effectively we leverage this to our strategic advantage is going to help define India's role in the global center stage. Industry 4.0 adoption is one of the central moving pieces in the larger scheme of things. If India's production, productivity, and efficiency has to go up, it can only be done by technologically leapfrogging. And this will happen only when we adopt Industry 4.0. And that is truly our future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kant, for this insightful, comprehensive address, which will set the tone of our deliberations. It's very reassuring to hear that you think India is well positioned to take advantage of Industry 4.0 and leverage its potentials. And I think all the challenges, including of the reskilling of the workforce, have been highlighted very well. I'm sure different speakers will pick them up. Let me now turn to Mr. Dilip Sahni from CII. He is Managing Director of Rockwell Automation, and he is co-chairman of CII Smart Manufacturing Council, our partner for this venture. So over to you, Mr. Sahni.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Kumar. It's been a pleasure so far to be a part of this event and to listen to the very comprehensive set of thoughts that Mr. Kant just shared with us. Before I begin, a very good afternoon to all the distinguished dignitaries as well as the fellow participants, who are present here today. It's a great gathering, for what is obviously a topic of great national interest for us. And I must say that, on behalf of CII, it's been a pleasure to collaborate with ISID, for this policy discussion. I think it is very, very timely, right? Now, I don't think anyone could have painted a more compelling and a complete picture than what Mr. Kant did. I think if Indian manufacturing has to fulfill its destiny and lead the growth of the Indian economy and really fulfill its potential while creating millions of jobs that we are expecting manufacturing to create, we've got to completely reimagine manufacturing, in the Indian context, and really change the trajectory that we've seen manufacturing to be growing at. And I say this without even factoring the hurdles or the obstacles that we obviously encounter during the pandemic phases, right? But I'll submit to you that we are at a unique moment in time where technology-led disruptions are creating possibilities that make it entirely feasible for us to fulfill our aspirations, realize the full potential that we have. And I would say not doing this for us nationally is not a possibility, right? We just must be successful. So over the next few minutes, what I would like to do is just lay out at least the point of view that we have from CII, and some additional thoughts just coming in from a technology-led perspective, which I think would further set the stage for the deliberation for this afternoon. I'm not breaking a news to this audience, right? The advantages and really the tailwinds that we have as India, right? The macro trends, be it the the unprecedented growth that we witnessed, of a middle class, and the, what's often cited as one of our biggest demographic dividends is young, educated workforce, right? These are some advantages that we have. They're not yet fully ready to make the impact that we want them to, but it is an advantage which many of larger nations across the world do not have. Yet at the same time, there are some great technology enablers, which are available today, were not available, say, 5 years ago or thereabouts. What are these technology enablers that I'm talking about? It's rapidly lowering cost of computing and connectivity. Connectivity that is pretty much becoming, all pervasive, and we've seen the impact of that, during these COVID, induced lockdown phases, right? The other technology enabler which has to be, taken cognizance of is, and I'm saying this especially in the context of industry in manufacturing, is this convergence of IT and OT. OT is, just to be abundantly clear, is operational technologies which are distinct from information technologies. But they used to be parallel universes. But what has begun to happen, or what has been happening now for a period of time, is that the two are coming together and they're helping unlock this convergence. Is what is actually bringing about all the possibilities that speakers before me have alluded to, right? Now, the picture would be incomplete if we did not call out the very critical consideration that we have, which is that of sustainability, right? Manufacturing, if it has to grow, it has to navigate through some very stiff challenges, which are posed by the climate conditions that we are all witnessing, which are deteriorating. So sustainability becomes a very, very important consideration as we go forward from here, right? Now, it was already called out, how the three prior industrial revolutions have played out, and technology has really been the disruptor that has brought about, another new revolution. And we are at the threshold of this fourth industrial revolution, right? I would just highlight one aspect of it, which is, what was taking century and later on decades to happen from one industrial revolution to another. Well, now the timelines are getting compressed. You do not have the luxury of people spending an entire generation, right? In one of these industrial revolution epochs, right? It is happening pretty much in real time in front of us, right? And people are already talking about, the fifth revolution, et cetera, et cetera. What I'm trying to say here is the timelines are really getting compressed, and we have to get used to, a much more greater degree of flux, and if you want to really call it in that manner, a greater degree of chaos that we'll have to really work through, as there are varying degrees of adoption of these technologies across the industries, right? And that's another one consideration that I would like to place in front of this roundtable today. Now, we are talking about these are policy matters. We're taking a macro look at the entire industry, right? And if an entire industry, if India's manufacturing has to evolve and become what is commonly called as smart manufacturing, just one organization or one company, adopting, the principles of fourth industrial revolution, or having end-to-end digitization or digital transformation, just one entity doing it alone is just not going to give us the benefits that we want at a macro level or at a societal level, right? And a whole array of stakeholders, players from across the different parts of our ecosystem have to come together. This obviously includes, the makers and the shapers of the policy, which is government. It was great to have Mr. Kant as our inaugural speaker today, right? But we are not alone. While it's good to note that over the past several years now, there's been a very, very strong tone from the top, and a lot of spotlight that has been put on Make in India, in manufacturing really leading the growth of the economy. But let's also recognize that India is not the only one doing it. A lot of countries are trying to attract manufacturing, so there's competition for us, right? it's not just the Chinas and the United States. Each one of them have their own programs. Made in China 2025, or whatever is the Advanced Manufacturing Partnership 2.0 in the US, and of course Fourth Industrial Revolution, which actually came out of Germany, right? Every industry, every country is recognizing, and countries are competing against each other to attract manufacturing investment. And why not? Because manufacturing has been known to be, a creator of jobs and prosperity, right? So yeah, we need the shapers and the makers of policies to be absolutely switched on and be cognizant of this. And here it's great to see that there is tremendous amount of leadership that's coming in from that side, right? And of course, this is technology-led revolution. We are talking about it, right? Technologies have matured very well, right? I think, all of these technologies have already made their mark. We wouldn't be here having such, a dialogue in a virtual setting had it not been for technology, which is practically becoming ubiquitous. But, when I'm talking about technology today, I'm talking about the convergence of these technologies, right? The conventional shop floor or technologies that are found in industry or in plants and factories, right? These are the DCSs, the SCADA systems, programmable logic controllers, and CNCs, et cetera, with their own unique set of communication standards. They are very, very rapidly getting assimilated within the broader framework of technologies, and this convergence is now making all the possibilities around cyber physical systems, and the industrial Internet of Things possible. And I would say that it is so rapidly evolved that it is something which we are beginning to now, take as a given, which is a great place to be at, right? And then there's obviously a very, very strong and an important role to play, and that's the hat that I'm wearing today, is the role of industry. Industry really needs to come together and make it possible for best practices to be spread as quickly as we can, and reach out far and wide, across the entire cross section of industry sectors, be it automotive, be it pharmaceuticals, chemical, what have you. There are so many industries, and each with its own unique ecosystems. So industry consortium, have to play a very, very important role. But I would like to, as we get going with the policy dialogue, also place on, the table an important consideration, which is the role of standards, right? If an entire ecosystem has to evolve together, right, and recognizing that there are value chains, it is very, very important that there is a recognition of industry standards, so which can enable interoperability and some degree of commonality, right? With upstreams and downstreams of the value stream, right? I'm sure that later in the conversation we're going to have speakers who are going to actually talk about what is the state of manufacturing today and what can possibly be. Well, the consideration that I want to place on the table today is what can possibly be is already happening in pockets across India, right? And that is great, because seeing is believing. And there are a number of players that I'm witnessing, both as industry end users, say cement plants or steel plants. An example was given by Mr. Kant about Tata Steel's Kalinganagar plant, right? There are a wide variety of industry end users that have already embraced these technologies. What is more important is equipment builders. There's a lot of there's a lot of intelligence that goes inside of machines and equipments, and things like process skids, et cetera, which actually are very, very intelligent and smart pieces of equipment in themselves. So they are doing what they were designed to do previously. So say if you have a packaging machine, a horizontal form fill seal machine, it is doing what it is designed to do. But increasingly now, globally and in pockets in India, what is happening is the same machine is not only doing what it is meant to do, which is to produce packets, which have the potato chips that you and I consume, right? Or the ready-to-eat noodles or what have you, right? But in addition to that, to the end users, it is giving real-time data around how much energy is being consumed, what is the actual state of the machine, and it is providing all these data points in the context of the process. And what it actually then enables you to do is actually for analytics to take over, and analytics then makes it possible to predict a whole lot of process and machine related conditions. And these are insights which in the hands of decision makers, and when I say decision makers, decision makers are not just people who sit in boardrooms. A line side operator is a decision maker because he has to decide in real time whether he should stop the line operations or keep it going. So putting meaningful, actionable insights in the hands of all levels of decision makers becomes possible. For example, to let someone know that 40 minutes from now, a particular process is likely to stop is great information because they can then take mitigating actions. And that is possible now by harnessing the power of analytics, but that wouldn't have been possible if the machines were not smarter. So conventional machines are becoming smart very, very quickly, and that's all happening in real time. And these machines are increasingly self-aware, and they are also system aware. What it means by being system aware is they are well aware of the context in which they are operating. So they integrate very well in the plant or in the context in which they are implemented. So it's enabling plants to become smarter. So plants are now they are living assets that you can collaborate with, because they actually are not only telling you what they're producing, but they're also, because of the smarts that exist, they're actually highlighting things such as opportunities for yield optimization.
Mr.
Right?
Sani, I'm sorry to intervene, but Dr. Rajendra Kumar has to leave for another meeting. So if you could kindly wrap up quickly,
Sure.
would be.
Sure. So, no, I totally recognize this. So, I've got two thoughts to share, just in less than half a minute or so. The first thing is, manufacturing is evolving much more rapidly, the world over. And India has a choice to make. We can either continue to do what we've been doing, or we seize the advantage, because what these technologies have done is they've actually suddenly taken away the handicap that big, large manufacturing nations used to have, which is size and scale, right? Many of these technologies are actually equipping SME and MSME players, to be, playing literally on par with the big boys. That's point number one. Point number two really is, if you decode successful companies in the context of manufacturing, right? Fact-based decision-making is integral to their success. And also having one version of truth, across not just their own enterprise, but their ecosystem is also very, very critical to their success. These aspects cannot be realized just by themselves. You need to have, end-to-end integration and aggregation of data. And how can you have it if you don't embrace, the kind of concepts that we're talking about? So those are a few thoughts. Glad to be a part of this forum today. And back to you, Professor Kumar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sani. I think it was an industry perspective coming from a person who is deeply involved in it, and I think very insightful. Obviously, that we need a full ecosystem geared to adoption of this technology. Otherwise, we will miss the bus. Very well articulated. Thank you for that. Now I turn to our special, guest. For this afternoon, Dr. Rajendra Kumar, who is an additional secretary in the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. He is directing a number of Government of India's initiatives on e-governance, the artificial intelligence, the platforms digital platforms for health, finance, and skill, and many number of initiatives. And I think he is the right person to bring the lessons from running these programs, and how government is leveraging the Industry 4.0 and driving the e-governance agenda using these technologies for the benefit of people. So with those words, let me welcome Dr. Rajendra Kumar to address us and deliver his special remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you and very good afternoon to everyone. CEO Niti Aayog, Mr. Amitabh Kant, Chairman ISID, Mr. S.K. Mishra, Dr. Nagesh Kumar, Mr. Dilip Sahni, all the other distinguished panelists in this session. I am delighted to be here in this event because the focus of this event is a domain which is very important from the point of view of my ministry and my current work responsibilities. Let me try to place the discussion on Industry 4.0 in a slightly wider context of the vision that MeitY has set of $1 trillion digital economy by 2025. This is the framework that is now guiding MeitY's activities at the national level in collaboration with the industry, with the states and all the other stakeholders. So when we talk about Industry 4.0 and its importance in the India's industrial ecosystem at present, there is somehow a presumption that we have passed through Industry 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 systematically. And then we have come up at this level of our maturity in the industrial ecosystem. But if we really look back at how our industry has evolved, I would say that our industry currently is perhaps not even at 3.0 or even at 2.5. So the challenges that are there before us are humongous in terms of the effort required to bring our industrial ecosystem to this advanced level of competitiveness and maturity. And that makes it a very challenging task for the government, for our partners from the private sector, and all the other stakeholders involved to really achieve this vision of making our industry globally competitive with the help of this Industry 4.0 framework. As we are aware, currently the manufacturing sector contributes about 16 to 17% to our GDP, and the total overall industrial sector's contribution is about 25-26%. And if we see the last 3 decades of development, this share of the manufacturing sector in GDP has remained almost stagnant at the same level of about 16-17%. And many studies have shown that we have, as a nation, largely missed the bus of making manufacturing as one of the main stages of economic development. And this scenario presently, it makes us even more important for all of us to think together, put our efforts together, and visualize how we can make industry as the key pillar of our economic growth, and also to ensure that we can create enough jobs for our youth and we can give them meaningful and productive employment. In this context, if we see the latest developments in Industry 4.0 framework, it is based on a unique combination of cyber physical systems where humans and machines, they work in a smart working environment with the help of latest technologies. For example, advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, and other emerging new domains where the entire functioning of a manufacturing system can happen almost autonomously with minimal interventions from the human side. This, it is hoped that will take us to the most advanced level of competitiveness, increase our country's stature internationally in terms of being viewed as a key manufacturing hub. This is already happening to some extent, but we obviously need to do a lot more to achieve this dream of making India the world's most preferred manufacturing destination. So there are a number of challenges when we talk about Industry 4.0 and how it can really be used or developed effectively to meet the challenges that India's industrial ecosystem faces. So what are the solutions? Let me just briefly mention about this, because this is where the METI's current efforts are really focused upon. And this is where we think that in future, we can really reap benefits of this approach. If we see the current efforts of the government to really make India a manufacturing destination for the world, there are three major frameworks that are currently at play. First is the Make in India framework. The second is the Startup India framework. And third is the Digital India framework that METI has launched. All these three frameworks together, they aim at an approach of converging all the government's initiatives and benefits to ensure that our economy develops to the most competitive level, and we can develop and deploy the latest technologies to achieve the economic development goals that we have set for ourselves. In Digital India domain, METI has been playing a very key role in terms of ensuring that our digital infrastructure reaches every citizen in the country, including connectivity at all the rural areas, and connectivity reaching every person in even in rural hinterland. We also are very focused on ensuring that our government's interface with the citizens and businesses, those are transformed with the help of digital interventions. And that's where we have brought in the concept now of platformization of all the government domains, where the idea is to convert their interfaces using a platform approach to make it seamless in terms of being able to deliver services to citizens and businesses. Already, the health domain is being transformed with the launch of the National Digital Health Mission last year by our Honorable Prime Minister. And there we are seeing the great impact that this is having on the entire service delivery paradigm in the healthcare domain. CoWIN platform is a great example of how this platform approach in different domains can really transform the entire service delivery paradigm. And it also can transform the perception that we as citizens have towards government services and what government is doing for the people and for the economy. Similar efforts are now underway in domains like agriculture, in education, transport, etc., where we think that this larger scale platform development can really transform the entire interface that government has for citizens and businesses. In the startup domain, again, that's a very major area where METI is intervening, where the goal is to really support tech-focused startups to take up smart manufacturing, to take up advanced technologies for developing advanced R&D and deploying them in industrial ecosystems, so that our industry can benefit from these advanced technologies. We have more than 30 centers of excellence currently, which are being run in partnership with industry across the entire country, where the sole focus is to bring startups and entrepreneurs on board, give them support in the beginning from METI funded schemes, and then provide them with mentorship and guidance to reach out to the wider market, compete in the wider market, and become competitive on their own. There have been a number of success stories of startups from these centers, which I will not mention here due to lack of time. But I would like to mention that these have really proved very successful in bringing startups on board in a number of high technology areas, where the sole aim is to make India competitive, improve our innovation capabilities. We also have a METI Startup Hub, where we are currently supporting over 4,000 tech-focused startups, where again the goal is to really give them support so that they can become competitive. We also have launched a number of grand challenges in different technology domains, where we have awarded startups and entrepreneurs based on the solutions and applications they have built, where again the goal is to provide them with support that they need in the beginning of their startup journey, so that they can succeed in the wider world on the strength of their merits, on the strength of their technologies. Another area where we have been making very significant interventions is in terms of skilling. When we talk about Industry 4.0, one of the key requirements would be of highly trained manpower, which can really take up the task of modernizing, digitizing our current industrial ecosystem, and then trying to develop and deploy these technologies. And that requires a very high level talent that should be available in sufficient numbers for the industry. Our future skills program, which we are implementing with industry, is a step in this direction. We also have other domain-focused skilling programs for the youth, for the professionals. In cybersecurity, again, we are working with industry very closely and with government departments to ensure that our cybersecurity capabilities are improved in both mitigation and prevention through advanced predictive analytic methods. So all these domains are now within the Métis ecosystem, where the goal is to support the activities of the startups, of our industry partners and entrepreneurs to ensure that the wider goal of digital economy development to the level of $1 trillion in the next 5 years, and the overall goal of GDP rising to $5 trillion can be achieved. The effects of pandemic have been significant in several domains, but we have also seen that as a result of the due to the impacts of the pandemic, the adoption of digital has also got accelerated, and this is going to be the new normal, we hope, where we would see far greater levels of adoption of digital in the time to come, and that should give a further boost to our efforts to ensure that we can converge all the advanced technologies for the benefit of the industry, for the benefit of the government departments for delivering services, and for ensuring that our own overall ease of living and ease of business environments is really improved further. We have made great strides internationally in ensuring that we move up in our international stature, in ease of doing business, in innovation capabilities, in cybersecurity capabilities, in e-governance. So all these domains where Métis is making significant contributions, we are hopeful that in the next 3 to 4 years, we are in for very exciting times where we would be able to see very large scale digital driven transformations in various domains, which would help in transforming India's development path, our achievements in different domains, and where we all as stakeholders can feel very hopeful about the future that lies ahead of us. Let me conclude this point by saying that these events, they really serve a very useful purpose in bringing all the stakeholders together on a common platform to think about these issues, bring the ideas together, collaborate, and then decide about the future course of action. Métis is always available for this kind of collaboration, this kind of activities, and you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to anyone in our Métis team to really, help the department, help the government in doing things better, which will be more beneficial to the industry and in achieving the goals that we have set for the country as a whole for digital economic growth and for economic transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Rajendra Kumar, for a very comprehensive overview of all different government initiatives that are directed to harness the potential of socio-economic transformation by the digital technologies. And I think you said rightly, we are passing through a very exciting time. And I think more developments and transformations will be taking place with the initiatives that are being taken by the government. And so thank you very much for joining us despite your other commitments. I will be personally in touch with you to take forward some of the messages coming out of this meeting today. Thank you very much. Now, friends, we have heard some very erudite statements and presentations from industry, from the government at NITI Aayog, and from the counterparts of NITI in the line ministry, METI, and of course industry, the CII, the smart manufacturing perspective. Now, with those big picture laid out on the table, we have now two panels discussing one, the positive side, the potential side of these technologies, and the other discussing the negative or potentially damaging consequences on labor markets and how to address them. So we will right away start on the first one, and where we have 5 eminent panelists, and this session is focused on leveraging Industry 4.0 for India's development, emerging applications and challenges. And I think all the 5 panelists for this session are highly eminent in their respective areas. So I want to begin by inviting my former colleague in the UN system, Dr. Clovis Fryer. He has been at UNCTAD right now, but he has worked in New York, in DESA, and also with me in UNESCAP in Bangkok. And he has been very recently lead author of the UNCTAD's flagship report on technology and innovation, which focus on digital economy. So I think Clovis will be able to share some insights coming out of this report and the key messages that are of relevance to India. So with those words, let me invite Clovis to take the floor. Clovis, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. Good morning. Thank you for the kind invitation. In the next 5 minutes, I will highlight a few points of the UNCTAD's Technology Innovation Report 2021 and how it relates to today's discussion, particularly this session. I will start with the point that there are not only one, but there was already mentioned that 2 waves of technological change that could be of benefit of India. One is the digital revolution, Web 2.0. This is the wave that is at peak in developed countries, and we are now seeing a major push of digitalization and e-commerce in developing countries. So to put it in the perspective, UNCTAD estimates that the value of e-commerce was about $26.7 trillion, and 1.5 billion people shopped online in 2019. So the other technological wave is what we are discussing based on artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, and other technologies associated with Industry 4.0. This wave is at its early stage, but it estimates that these technologies already represent a $350 billion market, and one by 2025 could grow to over $3.2 trillion. It is important to understand this as a new technological paradigm, as already mentioned in this meeting, because the large divisions between countries that we see today began after the first industrial revolution. With each technological revolution, the inequality between countries only increased. Now the gap in the average per capita income between developing countries is over $40,000. So, but at the same time, historically, the beginning of a new technological revolution offers windows of opportunity for countries to catch up, depending on the strategy that they use. In this regard, I would like to highlight 2 challenges. The first is that these waves of technological change, as we know, are based on digital technologies. So to support innovation and entrepreneurship in this area, we have to deal with the digital divide. The problem is that with the increased interrelation between the real world and the digital world, digital exclusion and socioeconomic inequalities are becoming kind of the same. We have seen that now during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this tackling this digital divide a complex problem because it requires not only technological interventions, but also socioeconomic interventions. The second challenge is that these big waves of technological change, they move from some core sectors of the new technological paradigm to others that apply similar productive capabilities in a step-by-step gradual process. So a challenge for India is that the goods that it imports with comparative advantage are in sectors associated to much earlier technological paradigms, such as textile, chemicals. They are far from sectors associated with more recent technological waves. So technologies that are deployed first in sectors such as vehicles and electronics, say AI, robotics, IoT, big data, will take time to be deployed in more traditional sectors of the economy. So addressing these challenges require 3 areas of action, and they were mentioned before by the previous speakers, but I would like to highlight them here. First, to promote the digital revolution beyond the e-commerce and mobile money, really to foster digital transformation in the production sector, particularly in SMEs. Second, to prepare the environment by scaling up the modern sector of the economy and strategically entering value chains related to Industry 4.0. In this regard, the report shows that India is well positioned in the new UNCTAD Frontier Technology Readiness Index. India ranks 43 in this index and is the greatest overperformer, ranking 65 positions higher than its per capita GDP would suggest. It is driven that by higher number of scientific publications and patents on frontier technologies and the higher share of digitally deliverable services exports. And the third point is that to continue to promote is the need to continue to promote economic diversification to close the gap between the traditional and the modern sectors of the economy. So harnessing Industry 4.0, by doing that, the modern sector can drive productivity growth and export growth, but it will be a more diversified traditional sector that will create the jobs, drive structural transformation, and provide the basis for further productivity growth and higher wages. And that will reduce inequality. In summary, India would need to adopt frontier technologies and strategically insert itself in Industry 4.0 while continue to diversify its production base by mastering existing technology. So that has to be a critical aspect. The report brings many other messages that are related to the impact of frontier technology inequalities that are very important, and I hope you have time to explore that further in the open discussion, but I would like to stop here. Thank you very much again, Nagesh.
Thank you very much, Clovis, for highlighting some key messages and how they relate to India. And it's very reassuring to hear from you that India is well positioned to harness the fruits of these technologies. Very interesting messages, and how India needs to diversify its industrial structure to take advantage of these technologies, but also not to lose on the employment generation aspects. Very good points. We will come back to them in the open discussion. Let me now turn to Mr. T.P. Chopra, the president of BLP Group and CEO of BLP Industries, another of representatives of the private sector and industry. And Mr. Amitabh Kant highlighted that this, if India is to leverage this technology, it has to be driven by the private sector. So over to you, Ms. Chopra.
Professor Kumar, thank you so much for inviting me. Real pleasure to be out here and a real honor. I think what Mr. Amitabh Kant and all the speakers prior to me have made it out very, very clear that I really do believe that India can be at the forefront of this disruptive technology to set the standards. Professor Kumar, if it's okay with you, can I just share a few slides? I'll need the rights to share the slides. I'm disabled to share the slides. If you can just give me access. And then I'll spend about 7-8 minutes just to share with you how we as a nation are deploying these technologies to change the way we're doing manufacturing in our country. So I'm just going to share with you a few slides to very quickly put it all in perspective of everything everybody's been saying in terms of how we're deploying and making a difference in the real world. And I'll literally take about 8 minutes to give you a perspective in terms of what we do. So basically what Industry.ai does is really take all the technologies that you're talking about, is that how do we make all this real? How do we really make all this real in terms of transforming and using enterprise AI, industrial IoT to drive 3 things? improving productivity and reliability in manufacturing. In the auto industry, it could be OEE, in oil and gas, it would be predictive maintenance. 2, how do we reduce cost and energy efficiency? And 3, quality and sustainability. Now, the reason why sustainability is important is $650 billion goes in unplanned downtime around the world, and industries contribute to 20% of the global carbon footprint. And all of us on this call have a responsibility to change the way we do manufacturing, giving the pressure of sustainability for manufacturing around the world. Now, we started out by focusing on just the renewable sector because that's what we are. We are a power generation company. So we started by connecting all our wind farms and solar farms, collected all the data and used these algorithms to drive in productivity in power generation. And then a lot of the global utilities in the world, EDF, Total, came to us, and we connected thousands of wind turbines all over the world and used these algorithms to predict failures in these machines. But over time, the technologies has been adopted in transportation, in ports. People climb up 120 meters on those ski cranes at the port so that now we can predict failures on those cranes before the ship comes onto the shore. We use AI in one of the world's largest oil and gas refineries in the cracker plant, the paraxylene plant, to improve yield. We digitize production flows. We work a lot in steel industry. So recently, for one of the largest steel factories in India, a 3.5-kilometer line where we are installing sensors and gateways to digitize the entire manufacturing process. So you've been talking about AI and Industry 4.0. Just wanted to share with you how these technologies are being deployed in the real world to transform manufacturing across the world. The first one is Predict.ai, is the ability to connect any machine anywhere in the world, whether it's gas turbines, wind turbines, steam turbines, and predict when these things are going to fail. 2 is supply chain optimization. Trucks and trains are easy. The difficult one is a railway wagon, because in a railway wagon, there's no power source. So the 3rd generation IoT devices uses solar-powered IoT devices to drive 3 things in the railway wagon: improve utilization, reduce maintenance costs, and increase the life of the asset. The 3rd one is energy efficiency and sustainability. In large buildings and factories, one has the ability to connect all the parameters of a building or a factory: water, air, gas, electricity, steam, ETP, STP, to drive energy efficiency. Asset tracking is interesting. Today, we can put a pen in a 50-acre factory or a 50-acre warehouse and find it within 15 to 30 centimeters. And we do that by putting a little tag the size of a button on a shirt. Not only can we find the pen, we can see the pen moving around real time on the factory floor. And the benefit is we're able to drive asset productivity and workforce productivity. And lastly, I'll share with you a few examples of how AI can be used to use existing cameras to think like the human brain to transform the way we do operations, quality, and manufacturing. So the core is industrial data science, but then there's an element of IoT. So therefore, you need these IoT sensors and gateways for people to go and install these sensors in the wind turbine, the factories, the ships, in order to get the data, then use the video analytics to deploy it. So the core of what we all do is really 3 things. It's about connectivity. Is that how do you make machines communicate? But then the challenge in the industrial world is that 80% of the data is unstructured. So how do we clean the data, ingest the data, fuse the data, scale the data, then apply the algorithms, and then automate the entire process? So this is one page how it all works. We install the IoT devices or the sensors or the gateways. That's what we do on the extreme left. And these sensors come from a wide array of ecosystems, from manufacturers in India, Siemens, GE, Schneider, Honeywell, Rockwell, Emerson. So we install these IoT devices. But one of the big challenges in Industry 4.0 is there's no standard protocols. So we have an edge software that we developed that communicates to all these sensors and gateways. We extract the data, clean the data on the edge, push the data onto the cloud, and then we create the application. But one of the biggest challenges in Industry 4.0 is there's no standard protocols. And as a result, GE would not share data with Siemens. Siemens doesn't share data with ABB. And therefore, the platform has the ability to communicate to all these sensors and gateways, process the data, use the existing telecom network in order to provide the application. Now, why is all this important? How are we able to do all this is purely because of AI. As a result of that, we've developed close to 85 proprietary algorithms to drive industrial productivity. But to develop one algorithm can take anything between 4 months to 1 year to develop one algorithm before these algorithms are deployed in production process. But these algorithms fall into 6 broad buckets in the world of manufacturing. The first one is failure prediction. How do you predict which machine is going to fail? Anomaly detection to go down to component level, gearbox, generator, bearing, to predict a detailed failure of a certain component. We provide the recommendations, but dynamic threshold, we're able to adjust these algorithms up or down based on environmental conditions and then create an asset health score. As a result of it, you see this heat map where on the x-axis, you can see the industries and the y-axis, some of the algorithms. Over time, we find that some algorithms have a higher correlation of success with some industries, and therefore we're able to shrink the time before we actually see a return on investment. Let me just very quickly give you a few pictures to deploy and show you how these technologies are deployed in the real world. This is in the world of manufacturing that, as you can understand, there are thousands of sensors in the world, but it's critical to understand which sensor gets deployed with which other sensor. So if a vibration sensor is deployed, which RPM sensor, which pressure sensor needs to go before we can actually collect all the data. But it doesn't matter what SCADA, PLCs, sensors, gateways there are, these edge systems are able to communicate to all these SCADA PLCs, extract the data, and then provide these insights. As I mentioned, we don't only take the data from the SCADA and the sensor, but we also take enterprise data, weather data, bring it onto the platform, and then create the application. Let me show you a live example. This is one of the largest automakers in the world that supplies sole supplier to Maruti, sole supplier to Mahindra, but they also supply bevel gears and differentials to 70% of the Tesla cars in the world. And therefore, what do? The first step is deploy all these sensors in all the critical areas of the factory. Vibration sensors, pressure sensors, temperature sensors. Step two is we clean all the data. And therefore, these sensors can be deployed, whether it's in auto manufacturing, all the way through large cranes on ports. So these are actual pictures on the port where actually folks climb up 120 meters on these cranes of these ports. They put all the sensors and cables onto the trolleys. They deploy all the sensors. And in addition to connecting to the SCADA PLCs, they deployed about 48 sensors in each of these cranes. And a variety of sensors, vibration, pressure, temperature, RPM, in all the critical parts of the crane. That's step number one. Step number two is cleaning all the data. Step number three is analyzing all the data. And then we provide these insights. Now, why is it important to analyze all the data? When you think about it, we get thousands of tags of data a second, but let me talk to you about three. Temperature, vibration, electrical signature analysis. And at the bottom left, you can see that with temperature signatures, we can predict failures maybe a few days in advance, vibration maybe a month, a week in advance, but with electrical signature analysis, it could be as much as a month in advance. And the reason why that's possible is that if you think about it, with temperature data, we might get bearing temperature, static temperature. Vibration might give you vibration faults, bearing faults, and mechanical faults. But with electrical signature analysis, the quantum of data is so much larger that our ability to predict these failures goes up significantly. Let me just very quickly share with you just one other application, which is using computer vision analytics. As you can imagine, there are thousands of cameras in the world. But the question is what we can do is connect these cameras, no additional CapEx or investment. These cameras are connected to an edge box, which analyzes this data, pushes it onto the cloud, and then you get live updates on either a web application or a mobile phone. Let me just show you some of these technologies and how they're working in real time. This is one of the largest cement factories in India, which actually you can see from an existing camera, people with helmets and safety jackets. A second from now, when the camera turns to the other side, you can see people in white. These computers automatically analyze the data, send out an alert to the headquarters or to the safety or the health officer so that certain actions can be taken. Therefore, rather than have 20 guys stare at 100 TV screens with 5,000 cameras, now you literally need one guy because these computers are doing all the work using AI. This is social distancing alerts about a year ago for some of the largest automakers. This is a camera at a height of 40 meters. We're able to detect markers at the far end and calculate the distance and send out an alert. For mask detection, where 25,000 people in a steel factory, we're able to detect people wearing masks or people not wearing masks and send out an alert. And therefore, we are transforming manufacturing, whether it's in quality, safety, security. How do we increase sales using existing cameras to detect things? Safety of moving trains, earthing device, bolt missing, pipe detached, or even in geofencing at big chemical factories and oil and gas. You can see out here when people walk into the black area or the safe zone, we're able to send out an alert when people are walking in. In ports, when a trucker gets out of a truck in a port, he's dead. These are some of the easier ones. This is the tough one where the human eye could not see the guy coming out of the truck. which sends out an automated alert. I'm going to stop there, but hopefully it gives you a practical application of how these technologies are being deployed in auto manufacturing, in infrastructure, in chemicals, in oil and gas, and construction, how these technologies are being deployed to really transform manufacturing. And I really do believe that we in India can be on the cutting edge of this revolution and actually do these, because of the cost points at which we deploy these technologies is a fraction of what they do it in the United States or in Europe. And I think now is the time for us to use these technologies and take it to the world to transform manufacturing all over the world. With that, Professor Kumar, I'm going to turn this back over to you to take over the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Chopra, for an eye-opener kind of a presentation. What can be done with these new technologies in manufacturing and also in other sectors? And again, it's reassuring to hear that India can be on the cutting edge of these technologies. So with that, let me turn to our third panelist for this session, who is an old friend also, Professor Sunil Mani. He is currently director of Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum, and he has been an old hand on high-tech industry. Sunil, over to you.
Okay, first of all, I thank ISID for giving me a chance, and I specifically thank Dr. Nagesh Kumar. What I'm proposing to do is basically to take you through India's position in the production of Industrial 4.0 technologies, as an economist would look at it. And then I would also look at the use of Industrial 4.0 technologies and its effect on employment, which I believe is actually the topic of the next panel. But I do have to talk about some of these things here because there are a whole lot of negative aspects which are presented as far as the use of these technologies are concerned. First of all, I think we need to be very clear about what Industry 4.0 technologies are, because this is not one technology, but different types of technology, although there is a uniting element in the form of these being digital technologies. And as Dr. Nagesh Kumar himself said right in the beginning, if you were to alphabetize them, there are at least 7 different types of technologies that you can actually think about. You can start with artificial intelligence, then go on to automation, then blockchain technology, cloud computing, data analytics, Internet of Things, and 3D printing. Okay. And in our country, we seem to be having some sort of government policy for most of these. For instance, in December of last year, we have a specific policy on additive manufacturing, which is about 3D printing, which has been brought up. Now, but what is India's record in the actual production of these technologies? Because we do have a lot of conversation on Industrial 4.0 technologies, its use in industry, etc., and so on. But what is actually India's actual record? As Clovis Ferrer has quoted his own Technology and Innovation report, saying that India's rank in a composite index, which the UNCTAD had prepared, is 43, and it referred to India as an overperformer because given the per capita income of India, that rank was considered to be much better. Okay. And one aspect of that composite index is the number of publications which Indian scientists have been making in the area of Industrial 4.0 technologies. I specifically take artificial intelligence and robotics because it's easy to get this data from the Scopus index. And so if you were to take 2 arbitrary time points, 2011 and 2018, I pick up these points purely based on the availability of data. And so if in 2011, we had about 6,218 publications in AI and robotics. And at 6,218, it was only about 7.7% of all scientific and science, technology, and engineering publications which are indexed by the Scopus, which came from India. And one important aspect which the UNCTAD Technology Innovation Report also has brought about is that most of the Indian publications are own publications in the sense that they are not in collaboration with foreign researchers. It's only very a few number of these publications are actually in collaboration with researchers which are based abroad. And it's not a globalized system of production that we see here. And when you take 2019, which is the latest year for such data are available, the number of publications in AI and robotics have increased from 6,280 to about 26,779. So at 26,000, it is about 16.62% of the total number of science, engineering, and technology publications which have come. And as I've said before, it was only 7%. So in a matter of about 8 years, it has gone up by almost more than 100% to 16.62%. So in other words, as the previous speakers also have spent, India has actually a fair amount of capability in creating new knowledge in the area of Industry 4.0 technologies, which may actually be used by other countries and other situations. Its actual usage within India itself has been pointed out, has been pretty limited. Now, I take one particular technology which has actually been used to a great extent in our manufacturing industry, which is the use of multi-purpose industrial robots. And based on the data from the International Federation of Robotics, and this is one aspect where the negative employment effects have also been talked about. And in fact, the Technology Innovation Report has a very nice table where they have actually given the full range of estimates which are available from different types of studies, where the effect of, for instance, automation on employment has been worked out. At the very extreme, you have the estimates by the original estimate of where it's been shown that it is about 47% of all US employment is going to vanish within a matter of about 15 to 20 years from now. Okay. And of course, these estimates have also been questioned, and you have estimates ranging from about 8.5% of all employment vanishing to almost like 47%. But what is the position in India if you take automation, and if you take a proxy for that, which is the use of multi-purpose industrial robots, because you do have operational stock of these robots from the International Federation of Robotics. They do an annual survey, and so we have this data for a fairly long time series here. So now, if you look at the actual use, you can see that it has increased from just a very paltry figure of 250 robots in the manufacturing industry in 2003 to about 23,000 in 2018. Now, the choice of this time period, again, as I mentioned before, is purely due to the availability of data. Okay. Now, we can't make much out of this in terms of the employment consequence. If I just give you the total figure for 250 to 23, whether this is high or low is difficult to be interpreted. So we have to convert them into a density basis. So you take the number of multi-purpose industrial robots which are actually installed and used in the manufacturing industry per 10,000 employed persons. Now, why 10,000? It's just a convention. Okay, so it used to be the density used to be about 4 per 10,000 labor force in India, and it has now gone up to almost like 15.43. And of course, this is for manufacturing industry as a whole. And but actually, when you look at the distribution of this among various manufacturing sectors, you can see that it is largely confined to one particular industry, which is basically the automotive industry. And in fact, historically speaking, robots have actually been used only in the manufacturing industry. In fact, the earliest study on this in the West is by a man called Kenneth Flam from Stanford University, and he had actually shown that much of the usage of robots in the late 1970s, early 1980s was largely confined to the automotive industry. And in fact, that's precisely what you see even now, both in India as well as internationally speaking as well. So a slight diversification has happened in the sense of even material handling industry now increasingly using robots. This is basically in the mining industry and so on, basically to use material handling. But the problem with this data is that unless you have task-wise data, you really cannot talk about employment effects, because in every occupation, there are several tasks and not all tasks are automatable. And there are only certain specific tasks which are automatable. So you need to have task-wise data. And when you look at that data, which the International Federation of Robotics allow you to, you see that a lot of the robots which are used in the automotive industry, for instance, are used only in two tasks, basically in welding and painting. And even within welding, it is only used in arc welding and spot welding. And if you use the Kenneth Lamb's historical data for the 1970s and 80s, that's precisely where all the robots were actually used. So even in the year 2000, in the late 2000, robots are still used basically in those occupations where you require a high degree of precision, and also where the occupational hazards are extremely high. So multi-purpose industrial robots are used. They're not being used in other areas of the manufacturing industry as of now. For instance, you don't have that many robots which are being used in the cotton textile industry, where it was feared that if you were to use this in a labor-intensive industry like the cotton textile industry, if you were to use a lot of robots, and a lot of employment will vanish. And in fact, as has been shown, if you look at the United States itself, over a period 1950 to year 2000, only one occupation has actually disappeared, which is basically the occupation of a lift or an elevator operator. But of course, that has been replaced by the security guard, because the security guard in many of the buildings will actually conduct people into the elevator and push the right button for them to go to the right floors, etc. and so on. So I think while automation has increased, and also there are two other aspects which one has to take into account. One is basically the fact that the price of automation products have dramatically decreased during this period, so it becomes even reachable for SMEs and MSMEs. Okay, so it's only a question of time when these robots will begin to be used in number of other tasks and other industries other than the automotive and material handling industry. So they can have actually a negative employment consequence in the future, but not at the moment. So because the total employment, if you were to use the annual survey of industries provided by the organized automotive industry, which is basically the vehicle manufacturers and the component manufacturers, is not more than 8% of the organized manufacturing employment. Okay, and within that, only two tasks are sort of automated, and wide variety of other tasks are not automated at all for the time being. Having said it, with the development of a number of other technologies within the within this industry 4.0, for instance, artificial intelligence, and with the result of many other complementary technologies, for instance, the speed of the internet, the storage capacity, and cloud computing, etc., and data analytics, etc., and so on, which the previous speakers also referred to. It is possible for many tasks which we thought were not automatable to become automatable in the future. Okay, so the negative consequence on employment cannot be generalized from what we observe right now, because of the exponential way in which number of those technologies are actually progressing. So in other words, what I'm trying to tell you is that India has an immense potential in the creation of automotive in industry 4.0. Technology has been already shown in the composite index. India's rank in R&D, for instance, in the UNCTAD's readiness index is 4, while its overall rank is only 43. Okay, and in fact, you have already seen in terms of the number of publications which are emerging. And one could repeat this study with also the number of patents, because publications normally emanate from academic institutions, but patents normally emanate from manufacturing and industrial enterprises. But unfortunately, we do not have much idea about the data on patenting as far as Industry 4.0 technologies are concerned. Although I am aware of a recent study by the Center for Security and Emerging Technologies, which is a think tank based in in Washington, DC, which has actually looked at patenting, and they give a very high figure of patenting from India, but I haven't got a chance to verify these numbers and so. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. I think you have talked about a number of things that come out of the recent data and analysis. But one thing which is very strikingly you have said is that India has the capacity and capability, but this is being used by other countries more than India is using its own capacity. So we need to find ways and means of harnessing our own capacities, for God's sake. So this is a very important thing. I think I want to flag from your remarks, and I'm sure we will come back to that. So let me.
We cannot hear you. I think your mic is muted.
Is that, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay. I put my book on the keypad, so maybe that, affected. So now our next panelist is Professor Amresh Chakravarti, is chairperson of Center for Product Design and Manufacturing at the very famous Indian Institute of Science. And he is an authority on these issues. So over to you, Amresh Chakravarti, sir. You are muted. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm repeating you now. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Can I share my slides, please? If you can. Please let me know if you are able to see it.
We can see them very well. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So let me just go through a few points here. So the first point is that the understanding of manufacturing, when we have already spoken about the importance of innovation and strengthening the technology support to manufacturing. I just want to step back a little bit and talk about the fact that manufacturing was not very long ago used to be understood as materials processing. And this has considerably expanded to the entire manufacturing centric life cycle, all the way from the materials to the design, development, manufacturing, and then to the distribution, installation, supply chain, and finally the humanity in the business. So I think we need to look at it that way. Today, if you look at where the cost of an aircraft is, about 40 to 50% of the cost is actually in assembly. And where the aircraft industry makes money is largely in the services and maintenance area. So it's not only how you make something, but also how you service something, how you maintain something, and so on. So therefore, we have scope for innovation in the entire life cycle: products, process, services, and business. And this is if we look at that overall view, then our exposure or addressing of these is rather limited. Now let me just quote from the Global Innovation Index Report 2020 that if you invest more into innovation, innovation leads to greater output, and this has an impact on economic growth. That is seen across the countries. But what is most interesting here is that in the index report, you also see that for the same amount of innovation input, the amount of innovation output can vary quite considerably across countries. And for the same, for very, very different innovation output, or for the same innovation output can happen for very different investments. So you can get a spread in both sides. So in other words, there is something more than just investing in innovation. And one such thing is that we need to have a driving of an ecosystem of innovation for the entire manufacturing centric life cycle. So the connectedness that Industry 4.0 needs to be leveraged for also connecting the innovations. This is a very important point. The second is that it's not arbitrary. Typically startups, if you look at the percentage, about 96% of all startups in India fail. Now, why is that number so small? Because there are values of death and these valleys of death are not addressed well. And therefore, there is a strong need for design-led, the importance of design, systematic design and innovation in order to overcome them. This needs to take advantage of new technologies, digital revolution in Industry 4.0. So where do we, just to say that the innovation ecosystem, of course, have academia, industry, all kinds of industry, the product manufacturer, the goods manufacturer, the services, the training provider, very important. Several of you mentioned already the importance of training, and the innovation startups. Of course, government is very important, and the other connects to the society, the NGOs and so on. So we need to embrace all of them. And this is where we need to focus. We need to focus on a connected research, innovation, implementation, validation, and training system. And so what are you going to need to train? We need to train into the mindset for innovation, the design thinking. We need to train into systematic development and innovation process. The science and technology building blocks, both hardware and software, because we are talking about CPS, right? The cyber physical system, not one or the other, but one and the other. And within that, we need to focus on materials, components. Many of these are not available in the country. We are import dependent. For example, major actuators, good quality motors are not made in India. Subsystems, then systems, and finally the methods and tools. Again, the methods of tools are software tools and hardware tools. I think Amitabh Kantji already mentioned how expensive some of these are. And I think we need to drive down the cost. It's important. Skills training and education on all levels, from ITI to IIT, the entire value chain. And we need to have research and innovation to develop these building blocks. They are not there. This is the major area we can get rid of import dependence. And this is something where the India is not civilization, it's actually innovation, because you need to compete with the world while being affordable. So it has to be advanced and affordable. Advanced and affordable materials, critical subsystems, critical systems, critical software elements and systems, and the methods and tools for supporting that process, including the edutech platform, so that you can expand, massive education and training across the country. And in terms of training and education, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of vendor development. The vendor development is absolutely critical. Otherwise, the OEMs will not have the right kind of people to support them. Blue collar skill development has been already spoken about. And then, of course, the higher education in this, the human resources in undergraduate and postgraduate education. And there it is important to create, engineers are going to be a major part of that system. And these engineers need to have not only knowledge of technology, they need to have the knowledge of the society and the business along with the knowledge of technology. This is very important. Otherwise, they will simply be able to work for somebody. They will not be able to create new industry. And they need to have this wide knowledge of technology across multiple areas. So the less the silos, the better. And this will be integrated through understanding of the centrality of design thinking and the systematic innovation process. That's the glue. That's the glue that will bind them. And this has to be done by putting open-ended problem solving and problem finding. Problem finding is very important as part of training. And finally, the importance of the higher level research, because otherwise we will always be buying technology from somebody else and trying to adapt to it. We need to have our own capability, and therefore academic research is particularly important in connection with industry research, but not only looking for the low-hanging fruits. We need to look for high-hanging fruits as well. Otherwise, it is always going to be yesterday's technology. And there the areas of importance are design thinking, systematic innovation processes, additive manufacturing already mentioned, but including feedstock production, because the major cost of additive manufacturing is actually in the powder or the wire. Robotics, autonomous systems, including robots as products. That's a major market that is waiting to be harnessed. The entire area of human-machine interaction, augmented reality, virtual reality, haptics, human-machine interaction, user experience, and so on. Digital smart manufacturing, simulation and optimization. Development of critical machine tools for precision manufacturing. Development of critical building blocks for Industry 4.0, sensors and actuators. standards and certification frameworks. I chair the Bureau of Indian Standards Manufacturing Committee for Standards. And we know how difficult it is to create standards that are, and somebody already spoke about interoperability, very important. Cyber security to tools and standards, again critical. Otherwise, just one hack can bring the whole industry down. Design and manufacturing informatics, how do you use the knowledge from the past in order to empower the future? Very important. Then design for DFX, or design for X, design for manufacturing, design for family cost, design for maintenance, all that. And particularly important is sustainable design and manufacturing, because all these new things are going to have a footprint on the environment. Where are you going to get that from? So how do you reduce that? And one important area is composites, especially biocomposites, because biocomposites is going to be the future. And all of them cannot be evaluated without non-invasive measurement, testing, and inspection. So you need to have high quality, highly affordable inspection tools. So I just want to, and of course, factory automation. Now, I want to finish this by saying the following, that if you look at the MSMEs of India and compare them with the MSMEs of, let's say, Korea or Germany, which are, by the way, the largest creator of jobs in manufacturing, right? If you look at that, they are very similar in terms of the number of jobs that they in these countries. If you look at percentage of GDP that they carry, they are very different. In Germany or Korea, they carry about 80% of the GDP. In India, they carry maybe 16-20% of the GDP. So there is a huge difference there, which means that they are not really providing enough value add. Now, why are they not providing a lot of value add? Because most of these companies, MSMEs, are actually micro enterprises, less than 10 people. And when you have very small enterprise, you are a hand-to-mouth enterprise. You do not need to invest in reskilling, in putting technology, and so on and so forth. So you are really only operating at a very basic level. So our challenge needs to be, and vision needs to be, how do we take this micro to become small? How do you take the small to become medium? How do you take the medium to become large? That's very important. Because if we can do that, how do you do that? By creating new technologies of Industry 4.0, as I was mentioning some of them, which have to be advanced, affordable. Think about 10x technology. Can we reduce the cost 10 times? Because many statistics show that if you bring down the cost half, your market size is 4 times. And therefore, it will create automatically market. And that market will churn and turn these MSMEs into better MSMEs. Last point before I finish. We also need to pick MSMEs, particularly the forward-looking one, and train them to become innovative themselves. They don't have to depend on somebody else. Let them become product creators. Now, you all of you know about Stedler, right? A company. Stedler is a medium enterprise company in Germany, but it's also an MNC now. So we need to train and help our MSMEs to become not just looking inward into our market, but looking outward into other markets outside India, because that's where the larger party. And then, of course, we have to make them competitive. Otherwise, they can't compete at the market. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chakravarty. I mean, highlighting the challenges for harnessing these technologies in terms of training and research, all very well taken. And I think we will come back to them. And let me now turn to Dr. Raja Mitra. He's joining us from Manila. And again, another old friend, currently working as consultant at ADB, but he has been for many years at the World Bank in Washington, DC. So Raja is writing a book on harnessing the new technologies in India's context. And I think it would be very interesting to hear from him what is the focus of his writing and research. Over to you, Raja. You are muted. You are muted.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nagesh. I'm very happy to connect to you and some of the other people I know, but many new faces. It was a very impressive set of presentations, so it's a bit hard for me to kind of say something added. I have not prepared any slides or anything. I'm doing a book which uses a sort of a 14-pillar framework for understanding what's driving and what's constraining, in this case, focusing on the digital economy transformation. And I believe in a sort of an integrated understanding. But I don't have any slides on that, maybe some other time in future. Just some few points. I believe that it's important to look at Industry 4.0 from a broader context. In my case, I'm using one of the old terms, modified new economy. And also I liked what was mentioned earlier, alluded to, that India, given the diversity of Indian economy and Indian manufacturing sector also, we are looking at first, second, and third revolution simultaneously, not only industrial, but also agricultural revolution, etc. And then question, what is unique? How India should then perhaps be different from other countries? One obvious area is to look at what has been successful. And there are many successes, not only IT, but engineering industry. Long back, I was working in Pune in engineering industry in the 80s, and a lot of good engineering companies have, things happen there. And some of them use quite advanced automation. Some of them are foreign companies. But in the recent decades, the big success story is, of course, the IT sector. Now, what can we draw from that? Does that apply to other aspects of Industry 4.0? Broadly speaking, we talked about the two-leg strategy. Focus on exports, develop the competency and the markets and get profits. And then with that, you can then eventually develop a local market. So this has also already been alluded to by previous speakers, that India has a lot of potential to export and contribute globally in terms of advanced technologies in manufacturing and other industries. So obviously there are limitations in terms of the applicability of this technology in much of the Indian society. So, but the market is huge outside India, and there's a shortage of skilled and skilled people who can do it. So this is sort of a major opportunity for India. And then the other one is, we're all scrambling for entering this higher end thing of manufacturing technology. But given India's context, the labor intensive and the low tech is of course crucial for creating jobs, etc. And then there is an argument, which I heard in a video conference the other day, there's a window of opportunity of about 20 years. After 20 years, many of the opportunities in labor intensive manufacturing will be not there to the same extent because of automation, robots, 3D and all these things. And that may not apply to garment industry, but definitely to electronics industry. So there is sort of an urgency not only to move ahead on the higher end, but also to move at the lower end of the value chain at the same time. One more point. Most of us, including myself, we focus on the supply side. New technologies are coming, wow. And what to do and how to use them and how to develop them in the integrated fashion. But we have also the important side of the demand side. New technologies means new products, new markets, all kind of new things which we cannot imagine. And possibly that's where the job growth will be more. So we have to be prepared and think long term. Now, question is then, what should be the role of government, private sector? If you look around internationally, as we all know, there's a lot of variety of development models. In terms of India, what we see, the IT sector, largely private sector, biotech, also private, but in space and aviation, the government has been good, has been successful. So if you look around, Germany, the Nordic countries, Korea, Japan, China, Taiwan, Singapore, government has played a very important role as an enabler, and also in some cases an investor. And this goes beyond the legal regulatory framework, education, and R&D labs. More than that. So, question is, given the unique context of India, how should India position itself? Definitely, there is a need, what I can see, to reorientation both in the public and private sector. Public sector, we're all aware of the strengths and the weaknesses, but so also with the private sector, we have to think that guided by the short-term profit motive is not really conducive for long-term R&D capacity building. So there has to be some kind of balance. And obviously that is what many of the East Asian countries have been striving for, and some of them have been successful. So what I'm saying, we have to have some kind of openness and not only think of from a technocratic point of view, from an engineering point of view, but also from an economist, sociological, anthropological point of view. We have to see India in a broader context. There's a lot, when India is unique, but there's also scope for learning from what's happening in Vietnam, Thailand, and a vast number of other countries. Okay, that's all I can say for the time being.
Thank you, Raja, for highlighting how East Asian countries have been leveraging these technologies, and governments have been supporting. And I think the point that you made is that there is scope of learning from different countries, even though every country's situation, in India certainly in that context very unique, but still there is chance to learn, opportunity to learn from each other, and not to reinvent the wheel. Very well stated. With that, I think we have heard all the 5 panelists for this session, and as we are running short of time, running behind time, I feel like, because number of issues will come up in the second session also, and have an open discussion after hearing all of the speakers or panelists. So I want to straight away move towards the second session, Industry 4.0 and the future of work, managing the impacts. And so there, already some of the panelists in the first session and also in the opening mentioned about the labor market impacts. For instance, jobs are going to be lost, or the different kind of skills will be needed. So how do we manage the potential adverse impacts, I think, is the theme of this, or focus of this second session. So I want to straight away move to that and ask Dr. Umarani, Senior Fellow at ILO in Geneva, to share her thoughts about what is your thinking on managing the impacts. Over to you, Uma.
Thank you, Professor Nagesh Kumar, for this opportunity. And if you don't mind, I'd like to do a presentation, a quick one. And I hope you can see the slides.
Yes, we can. If you can put it on the presentation mode, yeah, better.
Absolutely. So I'm very happy to hear all that is being discussed on automation and Industry 4.0 and all of it. But while listening to it, I thought that while all of that was mentioned, there was one thing that did not get mentioned, was with regard to the digital labor platforms. I do think we talk of platforms in a very different way. but digital labor platforms are very specific, and much of that has been enabled because of availability of data, because of availability of AI, because of internet and a whole lot of things. And I thought I would focus my presentation a bit on this because this has implications on labor, and I'm sure that some of the colleagues will pick up in my session on some of the aspects. Now, this is rather based on the recent report that the ILO has brought about in February, the role of digital labor platforms, transforming the world of work. And I've just put a link into the chat function. And we very clearly saw, just focusing on some of the sectors like the taxi delivery and the online web-based sectors, that this industry has actually risen 5 times globally since 2010. To a very large extent, this is because of availability of cloud computing and digital infrastructure that has been talked about, and also because of use of big data. As it becomes more and more popular, you find that there's more and more platforms that are coming into place, and also the data actually helps in development of algorithmic management practices and for machine learning. So you see a very clear rise on these platforms. One of the reasons why these platforms have also risen is because of availability of venture capital funds, which has led to very innovative ways of working, providing flexibility for both workers and businesses. And you must have all seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in India, you had a number of delivery workers who were actually delivering goods at the doorsteps of many of the households while there was a lockdown. Now, while we see the rise of these platforms, it's very interesting to see that about 8% of these platforms are actually based in India. United States very clearly takes the lead with about 29%, but also within the United States, it's very interesting to see that a very large chunk of these platforms are actually run by Indians. It's almost about 2/3 of these platforms. And the third country that comes up after India is the United Kingdom. So India is very much in the scene on the development of digital labor platforms. So you see a very clear growth. Now, where have they penetrated? Now, we have been doing a study, much more deep diving into India at the moment to understand where are these platforms actually penetrating. We have looked at taxi delivery and online, but we see it's far more than that. And you can pick any sector and you find that these platforms have penetrated. It's not just wholesale retail, e-commerce, but it's in agriculture, it's in healthcare, it's in home-based services, providing personal services. It's there in telemedicine, which has been used extensively during the COVID-19. It's used for platform staffing. It's used for a number of competitive programming or computer software development and other technologies. And it's used for a lot of cloud work, which is largely automation that is happening within the automobile sector that was being talked about. But what's very interesting, and the reason why I'm laboring on this point, is there's a labor element as part of it. And that's what is very interesting for us to look at. Now, we look at platforms as new forms of business, and there are very clear features that are there, which has implications on workers. The first thing is that the way the assets, or the way the entire transactions takes place, is getting modified. Now, normally in any business model, you would have firms actually providing a lot of assets to its workers. But in this model, it is actually the workers, whether it is a taxi drivers or freelancers, who actually provides the computers or the cars or whatever assets that are required. The second transformation that we see is that a lot of these work processes that are being undertaken, they are algorithmically managed. So there's hardly any human interaction that is there, and it's all automated within the process, whether it is allocation of tasks, evaluation of tasks, or rewarding of tasks. The third, which is probably not so new to the Indian context, but developing much more fiercely, is the way platform employs workers. So in the blue on the right-hand side, what the numbers that you see, that is the core workers that is engaged by the platforms on a regular basis. And what you see on the right in the green are largely workers who are mediated by the platforms, and they are informally contractualized. And what's quite interesting with this business is that workers have to pay some commission fee, not only to access work, but also on the amount of work that they actually get. There's a cut that is taken by the platform itself. Now, this is very new to this entire form of business. And we found that one of the platforms actually gets 62% of its revenue from the platform commission fee, which is charged to the worker. Now, what are the implications of it for the workers of this business model? So while there is a lot of talk about freedom and flexibility that the workers have as to when and where they can work, and they provide employment opportunities to women, to young workers as a stepping stone, or to migrants or refugees, I think there are a number of challenges that exist. They relate to earnings. There's an issue around long working hours on many of these platforms. There's an issue of skills mismatch, because if you look, and India is one of the countries that gets highlighted very clearly within this context, because we did a survey of about 12,000 workers in about 100 countries across the globe. We find that Indian workers are very highly educated, but the kind of tasks that they do are sometimes quite low skills tasks or quite mind-numbing, which raises issues around, is that the kind of development trajectory that we want to go into? There are issues around social protection, as many of them do not have any access to it. And there are issues around how the algorithmic management practices have implications on it. So I'm going to just touch a bit upon 2 points. One is, how do these workers fare in terms of earnings and social protection? And I'm going to present you some of the data based on the surveys that we have done over the past 1.5 years. And here's a comparison between India and China in the taxi, delivery, and online web-based sectors. And very clearly, you see that the Indian workers in taxi earn about $1.1 per hour, whereas in delivery, you find that Chinese workers earn quite far, almost 3 times that of Indian workers. And on online web-based workers, you do find that depending upon the sector, you find Indian workers earning much more than the Chinese, while it is less than the Chinese in certain other sectors. And what I also show is the kind of median earnings that are there, which are far, far below what you have, that of the average, which shows the grand inequalities that actually exist in the wage distribution itself. Now, a very large proportion of these workers have to pay a commission fees, which ranges between 15 to 44% of their earnings, which also reduces their earnings per se. And for many taxi and delivery workers, much of the earnings is actually based on the bonuses and incentives that are given to them, which actually leads many of these workers to work about 80 hours per week to actually ensure that they have these bonuses. And despite having these bonuses, the kind of earnings that they have is pretty low. And social protection benefits are quite low for most of these workers. On online web-based platforms, we did a very interesting comparison between the traditional and the online segment for similar kind of occupations that are done. And you find that workers on online actually earn 64% less compared to the counterparts, while developing country workers earn about 60% less than that of advanced countries. Nagesh, I've seen your raised hand and I'll be concluding soon. The second issue I'd like to point out is that much of the access, evaluation, and reward for work is through algorithmic management practices, and they are the ones that drive it, which has serious implications. And I think ratings and reputations become the key in this factor of determining whether tomorrow you can get work or whether you'll be deactivated. And it is not necessarily the kind of education or kind of other experiences that you have built upon these platforms that play an important role. Further, there's a lot of talk about freedom, flexibility. But however, when the workers cancel or refuse to do the work, then it has huge implications on their rating and also access to work over a period of time. And workers cannot actually have any sort of a redressal mechanism, because there's no dispute resolution mechanism actually that exists in the country where many of these platforms operate. And often we do talk about freelance workers having all the freedom and flexibility, but in reality, this is not really true because they are monitored on a regular basis. Workers have to take screenshots and to send their work, and they have to be available at a very specific time. Now, I do know that this is a discussion we are having around industrial policy and what needs to be done around it and the approach towards. But I think while we look at the industrial policy approach, equally important is to look at the regulatory and the competition policy approach. And here what we have seen is that countries around the world have been taking certain steps to improve the working conditions of the workers. And this has taken various forms, from providing social protection and work injury benefits to classifying workers into employee category based on the relationship that exists between the worker and the platform. And in certain other countries, steps have been taken to provide access to data to an extent that is possible. But I think the regulatory responses have been very diverse across the world with regard to ensuring protection to workers on the digital labor platform. So what we at the ILO try to recommend is that these platforms actually operate globally across multiple jurisdictions. So there is very clearly a need to have a sort of an international policy dialogue and coordination where the governments, the platform businesses, and the workers can get together and try to actually discuss about not only regulations within the sphere of the labor law, but I think what's increasingly becoming important is to look at competition law and the laws of accountability and algorithms. Now, algorithmic management practices to a very large extent and the source code of algorithms are actually part of the WTO e-commerce rules. And this has huge implications on labor today. So I think it's very, very important for us to open that box and also get into the discussion. And finally, I'd like to say that other important point, which is very important, which I'm sure my other colleague Parminder would pick up, is a whole issue around data protection and the portability of worker data and ratings, which has become fundamental today on platforms and with digitizations in ensuring protection to workers. So thank you very much for this opportunity to discuss here.
Thank you, Omar, for this very insightful presentation on the gig economy workers or platform workers, as you said. And I think their regulatory aspects of these workers who are covered by very little social protection is something we need to be worrying about. And I'm sure policymakers will be pulling their heads together to address that. So thank you for bringing this on the table. Let me move to our next panelist, who happens to be my own colleague from ISID, Dr. Satyaki Roy, Associate Professor at ISID. And Satyaki, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Nagesh Kumar, and thanks to all the distinguished panelists and participants. So what I'm going to do in these few minutes is I'll try to highlight some of the major concerns of diffusion of technology, which is related to specific to Industry 4.0. And I believe that these are completely different from the past industrial revolutions. Now, what I would say, first of all, that the major concern that arises, and this had happened to all technology revolutions in the past, it has been accompanied by a fear of job loss and employment. And this has been reflected in different ways. We see the Luddite movements in the early industrial revolution. It has been written by David Ricardo on the debate on the use of machines in his Principles of Economics. One chapter was on machinery, where he talks about how machine substitutes labor and unemployment is being created. A century later, we see John Maynard Keynes in his famous essay, economic possibilities for future generations. He talks about technological unemployment and how difficult it is to absorb this whole large number of unemployment that will be created by use of technology. 2 decades later, we see Wesley Leontief making it very explicit that in the beginning of the 19th century, machines replaced horses, and now machines are going to replace human beings. But what I want to underline, first of all, that what has been predicted and the fact that we see in the past industrial revolutions, as well as in 1970s when mechanization was taken up in Asia, in agriculture particularly, the net employment, the unemployment was not so high as it was predicted in theory. And this is precisely because of the technology always had 2 kinds of effects. One is the displacement effect and the other is reinstatement effect. So in sectors where technology is being used, obviously there would be loss in employment. Employment cut would be there, wages would decline because relative labor supply would increase, and also share of wages in value added declines. But there are also complementary sectors which are related to these technology using sectors, which are labor using. And if you have a faster growth in complementary sectors, then the job loss that is being created in the technology using sector may be compensated. And this is precisely the reason why we see that in the past 2 centuries, the advanced economies experienced at least 3 industrial revolutions. But if you see the share of wages in GDP or value added at the macro level remain more or less stable. It remained more or less same, which means that these 2 effects were active in the process of technology revolution. But what I'm trying to suggest that this is a problem in this new technology, which we're talking about in Industry 4.0, because as I said that you have to have a very high productivity growth in technology using sector, otherwise the spillover effects would not be very high. If you are introducing a technology which is marginally productive than the human labor, but you are replacing labor, then the net effect would be negative. And you have to have a very high growth of complementary sectors. What Robert Solow argues that in the past 3 decades, even if the digital technology has been used in advanced economies, the growth of productivity had been really very slow. And his famous comment that we see computers everywhere, but not in productivity statistics, in the sense that productivity growth was not very high. Now, why this is the case, and there I would make the following points. First of all, the process of diffusion was very efficiently done in past industrial revolutions through market. But what we see that market functions through price signals, in the sense that the allocation of resources takes place through prices and prices reflect marginal cost. Now, in case of knowledge-intensive industry, in Industry 4.0, once a product is being produced, the marginal cost of sharing information is close to 0 and even 0. And this is precisely the reason why you see huge amount of data and knowledge is being available in the internet free of cost. So market, which was appropriate mode of distribution or diffusion in the past technologies, is not appropriately functioning in the context of Industry 4.0, because here the marginal cost is equal to 0. And so price is not the appropriate signaling mechanism. The second important point which I want to make is that when we talk about market, if you want to derive a rent out of a new technology, in the sense that if you introduce a new technology, a farm introduces a technology in an industry, and if this is a new one which is above the average technology used in that particular industry, you earn a premium over and above the average rate of profit. But the condition is that you have to have a property right on the technology that is being used. So you should have a privileged access to that. Only when then you will get a premium out of that. Now, when this happens in a market, everyone tries to adopt the same technology. And this is precisely the reason it gets diffused, because competition drives innovation and stimulates the adoption of new technology. Now, in case of knowledge-intensive technology, the problem that knowledge has a typical character, in the sense it is not like iron or cement or any other input which depletes by use. It actually enhances by collaboration, by sharing and things like that. So more you collaborate, more you share, knowledge expands. But what we see, in order to derive rent, what is required is establishing property right. And now it is being done in a global scale by global tech companies like Facebook, like Amazon, and Alibaba. They are trying to control the huge amount of data that is being created through human exchanges in everyday life. So this controlling mechanism and establishing property right on data actually deters is detrimental for the progress of knowledge-intensive technologies. The final point which I want to make is that the process of diffusion of technology basically depends upon how the productivity gains have been distributed. And this process of distribution in the current society happens through factor incomes, in the sense that whether it is labor, whether it is capital, whether it is land, the incomes that we receive in terms of wages, salaries, or profits or rent are basically against the contribution that we make in the process of production. If you are not participating in the process of production, you do not have any claim on the productivity gains. Now, the problem is if the huge amount of labor becomes redundant in this process of using technology, the existing mechanism of distribution would not going to work. They are not going to share their productivity gains to the large section of the population. And this is precisely being reflected by rising inequality, which is very well documented in the recent UNCTAD report, which says that how inequality within countries have increased. So my point is there has to be a different or alternative redistribution mechanisms which other countries are thinking. One might be universal basic income. There are proposals of negative income tax. But this is a radical shift from the current arrangement in the sense that you are distributing income which is delinked from the contribution of work. And this is very significant. So what I am saying, that if you need to have a development of technology, Industry 4.0, and if the productivity gains need to be redistributed, we should have a more collaborative structure of production, and also in terms of distribution, it should be more inclusive and cooperative. And here I stop.
Thank you, Satyaki, especially for highlighting the inequality which is related to rise of these technologies. And there is clear evidence that how inequalities within the countries and between the countries are rising and widening very sharply. There was an economist report last year how within 1 week, the market capitalization of 5 companies increased by $1 trillion, you know. So it's just a small change for these companies. $1 trillion is a huge amount of money, but for them, it's a very small amount, the way they go up and all. So inequalities are rising and need to be tackled by different means, and we need to discuss the various options and also share the experiences across the world in tackling the inequalities. With that, let me turn to our next panelist, Mr. Parminderjeet Singh. He works for the IT for Change, NGO based in Bangalore. So, Parminder, you have the floor.
Thank you, Professor Kumar, and thank you to ISID for inviting me. Much has been said, a lot of detail has been put forward. So excuse me to make some very general high-level points about the topic of the day and within it, the workers' issue. The first thing I would like to state at a very high level is the very term Industrial Revolution 4.0. And I did see it today that it gets used in a narrower sense, in which you're talking about application of new technologies to manufacturing alone. And it is used in a broader sense, in which the whole digital economy is included. And my view is that probably we need 2 terms because we go back and forth and they're 2 very different things. They're both important, but the focus would be better if we talk about use of technology, new technologies in manufacturing in a different manner than the wider digital economy. And I do think, even as the panel or the meeting was in progress, I was looking at the WEF's original use of the Industrial Revolution term. And there also there's a confusion whether it's a larger digital economy or narrow manufacturing. It came out of Germany a lot, the 4.0 concept as well. And there it came out because they were trying to use their traditional industrial base as a counterpower to the digital platforms which US was dominating. So in all this framework, this discussion is located. And I much prefer, and I like Satyaki say that the fourth industrial revolution is different. And I think it's so different that I do not actually consider it 4.0 at all. It's qualitatively different thing which is happening today. And then let me spend a minute or two to say why I consider it different. Now, these are just paradigms. You can look at it in one framework or you can look at it in a different framework. And why I like to look at it from a different framework is that it highlights some things much more than what the first framework does, and thus it misses out. And on that, some very practical issues are missed out. And I try to put it like that industrial revolution was about harnessing and mechanizing physical power. Now, if you really look at it, before industrial revolution, all physical work was done even by humans or animals. And the first time a machine did physical work. So there was a disembodiment of physical power into machine. And that small thing defines a whole era, which is called the Industrial Revolution. And Industrial Revolution, then it remained no longer a technical thing, but is a socio-economic, cultural paradigm, which altogether encompasses the 2 centuries before this period. Equivalent to that, what is happening today, and that is how fundamentally different it is, that first time till now, even if machines did the work, the intelligence was in human beings. Human beings were the drivers of the machines, and they were large-scale organizers of effort. However, first time, there's a disembodiment of intelligence from human beings into machine. Look at the first thing, which was a physical power getting disembodied, call it Industrial Revolution. Intelligence getting disembodied, call it something else. I call it an intelligence economy or a digital intelligence economy. Digital intelligence word is, by the way, also used by UNCTAD today. So I think it is so fundamentally different. Just now, Professor was talking about suddenly a few trillions of increase in the market cap of 5 companies. Now, we know that 8 out of the top 10 companies globally are data companies. 10 or 12 years back, they were all industrial giants. So what is happening is not of that kind of quantitatively increased scale. It is qualitatively different. Give you another example. Waymo is just one division of Google which deals with transportation, digitally intelligent transportation. It is being said that in 10 years, Waymo would be bigger than the 10 biggest car companies. Now, this is not just a quantitative increase. What is happening today is that some companies, earlier they controlled mechanized power, and that's what colonization was. You had the industries, the raw material came from the colonies, you transformed it into finished products and then put it back in the markets. You control mechanized power in a large scale. Right now, what companies control is intelligence. They control intelligence of my consumption. They control intelligence of my entertainment. They control intelligence of transportation. They control intelligence of health. So what they control today is intelligence. It's like a brain. The brain is outside. They control the brain. Now, what is an Uber company basically? Uber is brain of transportation. They don't have physical assets. They don't have drivers. And really look at it, then ask yourself a question. What does it then it owns? It owns the intelligence of transportation in the same way Amazon owns the intelligence of commerce. Now, I'll quickly come down to the labor part of it. What happens that all the politics of the last 200 years have been around owning labor. It's been around the labor and capital fight. The parties on the left, parties on the right, everything was about owning labor. Today, it will be about owning intelligence. It is so fundamentally politically different. Very new type of politics, culture, and society would evolve. Who owns our intelligence? And what is happening today is that outside companies, either in China or the US, are owning all intelligence. If I have to take an appointment with my salon, it's an intelligence company located in the US who tells where vacancy is available today. Now, that's very funny. Even the gardener or a plumber which is coming to me may be through an intelligence which is owned by X companies. So now coming down to the labor issue, what we need to do is that labor has to own a larger part of the intelligence of the system. Now, we talk a lot about data, and you would be very surprised that why don't talk about data, but I talk about intelligence, because data is a raw product. That's not valuable in itself. What is valuable is the finished product. Data produces intelligence. Intelligence is the industrial product. Intelligence is what is valuable. If you own the intelligence, you own the system. Now, I quickly take an example and I'll probably stop and go to the final discussion. We have been, we have had these discussions with Umarani also about whether Uber drivers, rather than just trying to be employees, can they co-own the intelligence of the transportation system? Because they can always claim that Uber's whole asset is the data, which after all is almost entirely contributed by the cars which the drivers run. And these cars are owned by the drivers. They are not employers' tool. And if they can co-own the data of Uber, they can co-own the intelligence of Uber, they can ask for a share in the whole value of the company. So go up to that kind of a model where you co-own the intelligence of a company. And actually, there are new laws coming in Europe. There's a Digital Markets Act, which allows traders to ask for their own data back from Amazon, both anonymized data and personal data, and also ask aggregate data back. In the same way, Uber drivers can ask the data back from Uber. And there is another draft law in Europe, which is called Digital Governance Act, which allows them to form cooperatives. So these kind of new possibilities have to be seen where they co-own intelligence. And I'm not trying to connect this point with the earlier point I made, that unless we use a different lens and paradigm of intelligence-centric analysis of the digital economy, we would not be looking at these new kinds of paradigms of labor empowerment. And the last point, also something which Uma touched upon on WT, etc. We need to really decentralize the digital economy, because digital economy has this intense capability and tendency to highly centralize. We know it, everything gets centralized. There's one Facebook, there's one Google, there's one Uber. So we need to have counter-cyclical processes to decentralize things, move power towards the trader from the Amazon platform, move away to the Uber driver from Uber, and also communities, let the decision making be closer to the communities. And the WTO is trying to set up a global economy, and India is taking a right stand which says that we need to keep our digital policy space safe, which is very much required. Thank you so much again, Professor.
Thank you, Parminder Singh, for highlighting some of these issues, especially this intelligence getting concentrated and owned by companies, and the implications of that for the way value chain or value addition is divided between the labor or workers and the owners of that, machine or intelligence network that is running them. So again, very important point. Thank you very much for that. Let me turn to our next speaker, Dr. Nupur Chaudhary. Nupur teaches at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Are you there, Nupur?
Yes, Professor Kumar.
Okay, go ahead.
I'll just.
Please be brief, as we are running out of time. Yeah. Good.
Thank you very much, Professor Kumar, and to all our panelists, and to Dr. Roy for inviting me here. I'll just take this opportunity to share this. I'll share screen that I have a PPT. Is it visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. So very briefly, the point that I'll be making today is on the aspect of privacy. So constitutional implications of big data. And I'll try and highlight that through there are strategies that we use in the law school very often is hypotheticals. So case studies essentially, and I'll try and highlight it through that, right? So, I mean, there have been many speakers already, so I think more or less you're aware of what is this idea of big data. So as the previous speakers have mentioned, digitalization is happening. So old records being created into digital records, which basically means searchable. And there is, of course, also rapid and continuous collection of new data that is happening. And The data collection platforms are both private and public. So data collections are happening by the state and also by non-state actors at various levels. And also there is convergence of data, right? So between private collection and government collection, there is also buying and selling of data between platforms, right? And you also have something like the India Stack project, which is basically allowing you to digitalize records based on the Aadhaar kind of a platform, right? So I'll give you two hypothetical case studies because that's one way of kind of putting my point across as to what could be the problems of this kind of big data in India, the way we see it. So let's take the first case study. So Ramesh is a software executive in India and who loses his job during COVID, and then he starts looking for jobs, right? And he's fairly active on these platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and he's posting stories of caste and class discrimination in urban India. And then but he realizes that his search for software-related jobs have been unsuccessful. He faces 2 online interviews, one from a Government of India enterprise, one from a private aggregator. And then informally, the interviewers tell him that basically the reason for his non-selection is not because of any lack of competence, but because of the widely circulated views on social media. So he's a potential reputation risk for prospective employers. And then Ramesh finds that it is a fairly common practice amongst employers to actually look at the online profile of prospective candidates for employment and to mine this information through various public platforms in which the prospective candidate will be sharing their personal views on many issues, right? Social issues. And Ramesh believes that this is a new form of untouchability. And is created de facto to undermine his fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression, because it creates a substantial risk of loss of employment opportunities as a direct fallout of the exercise of his fundamental rights. Now, the question is that does Ramesh, under the present constitutional framework, as well as the statutory framework, is there any legal remedy available for Ramesh? He might have a legal remedy vis-a-vis a Government of India enterprise, but there is no legal remedy vis-a-vis a private enterprise. Okay, let's come to the second case study. Right, another person, Lata. Let's name her Lata, and she's a person in college who works with patient groups. Frequently, while dealing with cancer survivors, she searches on the internet for skin cancer. After passing out from college, she joins an organization where a private health insurance is offering a scheme for all employees in the organization. But the offer that is made to her, the premium is prohibitively higher. She can't actually buy that health insurance policy. And she realizes it's because of her past searches on the internet that has made her a profile of a high risk consumer, right? Which means that the insurance, she would not be able to buy insurance or maybe buy it at a much more higher cost than other people who are similarly situated in terms of their own health aspects, right? And she also believes that it's a discrimination, a violation of right to equality. Does she have a remedy? No, none actually, right? So to come back to very briefly, the usual debate in the media on privacy, of course, we have a right to privacy that has been well established now through the Constitutional Bench decision. But it's important to look at the right to privacy as an infrastructure right. That it acts as a scaffold enabling the functioning of other substantive civil liberties, actually. And currently, we do not have a constitutional jurisprudence that looks at cumulative harms. We look at individual harms, right? We don't look at harms to social groups or to citizens as a group. What is happening is that more and more extensive data collection and data convergence and then deployment of AI to make a host of decisions, which is predictive analytics, is happening. And this can lead to leading to a lot of silent discrimination of social groups and individuals by both private actors and by the state. Right? And this point needs to be appreciated in that sense. So it's not just a right to privacy per se, but right to privacy that enables you to allow you to actually guarantee your right to equality, for example, right? Or right to fundamental, your fundamental right to freedom of speech and expression, right? So the final point that I would like to make is that essentially big data collection and convergence will lead to individual and community profiling. This is the way big data works, right? To either provide you certain kind of goods or services at the individual level, at the community level, right? And we need to be more attentive, especially as lawyers, to both substantive rights and reframe the institutional focus on studying the impact of technology on individuals and social groups, whether it's look at them as citizens or consumers or social beneficiaries. We need to look at these developments and actually be able to make an assessment in terms of what is the constitutional harm or what is the constitutional gains that we get from these kind of technological developments. And therefore we need to, this is the opportune moment to reimagine the language of constitutional rights and values in this kind of an age of big data. I stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nupur, for highlighting the important issue of data privacy and how it affects our rights and our spaces for, taking decisions. And again, a very important point to be put on the table. Let me turn to our final panelists, and not the least, of course, Dr. Anand Kamath, who is with National Institute for Advanced Studies based in Bangalore. Anand, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Nagesh and Dr. Satyaki Roy, for having me over. It's an honor to be a part of this panel. I want to raise a few broad and quick concerns about technology and society, and importantly about inequality in the context of the future of work. Now, the philosopher Andrew Feinberg had remarked that the fate of our society is bound to the understanding of technology. And it's not unreasonable to extend this to the fate of our workforce also. That is, the fate of our workforce as bound to the mainstream understanding of technology. Now, phases of technological revolutions show interdependence between science, technology, economy, institutions, but critically also an interdependency on sociological realities. New economic paradigms, new technological paradigms are as much impinged upon by the sociological as much as the artifactual as well as the economic institutional. So I have three questions to ask in the context of this panel discussion. First, what will be the nature of engagement of the subaltern, of the marginalized with technological change in the context of transformation of work? Second, what will these technological revolutions, or rather will these technological revolutions bypass them altogether or be insufficiently harnessed by these historically disadvantaged groups? And third, will these technologies assist in the reinforcement of exclusion for these groups? In fact, will even new forms of subalternity or marginalization emerge due to technological progress in the new industrial age? Now, technologies are assumed to embolden skill learning, open access to new networks, new resources, improve the experience of work itself. And it's expected to deliver improvements in the lives and long-term livelihood prospects of individuals. But what is all too easily forgotten is that the stuff of a technology is not just science and engineering, but also sociology and politics. So the involvement or the permeation of any technology or technological artifact is invariably embedded in highly context-specific social structures, social processes, power relations, and so on. So a technology's role in the experience of work will be automatically highly differentiated for different social groups. And that's where the subaltern, a large majority within the country's workforce, comes into spotlight. Now, technologies can demonstrate creative possibilities of perpetuating the exclusion of marginalized peoples. Marginalized communities in urban India still do not have the requisite access to beneficial networks and markets, and they're left to operate in informal casual markets. They do not possess the means and opportunities to overcome vulnerabilities unless they're politically connected or happen to be fortunate enough to capture some opportunities in small business. So the differential effects of technology are based very significantly on the socio-political context of these groups, which I have seen in my research on whether it's on civic workers or weavers or sex workers or Dalit communities. So new detrimental labor arrangements are not merely technological outcomes. They are the result of sociological foundations of those technological experiences. And the nonlinear path of technological evolution is not just about competing rational choices, but actually highly influenced by irrational sociological structures such as caste. Now, very little of these complex dynamics are appreciated or accounted for in policy formulation in India as far as technology goes. The thriving incarnations of caste are given only a passing mention in the general policy discourse about technology and economic development in India. It seems we have assumed caste to have become irrelevant in the conversations on technology, labor, and development. Let me assert that what is usually counted for and interpreted by technology policy is the quantifiable, the economic, and the tangible. And this crucially, therefore, misses the political questions and analyses of genuine agency, empowerment, and rights. So labor substitutability is one thing, it's indeed important. But what about technology-led social reproduction within new arrangements? That is a very important question to be asked in this panel. Labor substitution, therefore, may not be the central question with respect to technology and the future of work. There may be more important concerns about well-being that need to be put on a pedestal today. And those concern especially social inertia and the need for genuine modernity for our workforce and for our economy. Technological intensification can empower the marginalized only when frameworks of justice and equity are interwoven in place, without which technology may only aggravate exclusion and further the deepening of inequality. Now, technology can be a source of progressive dynamism, and it can be it can fuel more improved democratic participation in economy and society. So we need to broaden out aspirations from simply tactile imaginaries, device modernization, and visual pageantry of modernity into more genuine imaginaries of modernity that include social justice, dignity, excellence, and enhancement. Processes must be assured that actually convert technological and artifactual ubiquity into progressive, emancipatory, everyday life choices for our workforce. So genuine modernity can be realized only when technologies are inclusive and they are actually converted and translated into capabilities and functionings for our workforce. We must venture into ensuring how technologies, especially digital technologies, are being adopted by the marginalized and subaltern, and whether they have indeed had empowering effects or whether technological transitions have only alienated and disempowered these groups further. So I end by asking, by saying that we need to provoke and compel the discourses on technology and development in India to acknowledge the technologically less empowered as seriously as the discourse engages with high-tech interventions and artificial intelligence. We need to understand that technological inequalities more often manifest as intangible differences in empowerment rather than tangible differences in device digital divides. So the evolutionary path of technology can be appropriated for greater well-being of our workforce and for the future of work itself, provided it is steered by frameworks of equity and of social justice. So I'd like to end over here. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Anant, for putting on the table another very important issue and challenge, whether technology, will marginalize the already vulnerable sections further. I think this is a very important issue. And with that, we have listened to all our panelists, and already we are 13 minutes behind time. We have passed the time of this session. But I want to ask, your permission to continue for a few more minutes to have some open discussion with some participants who are there, who are connected. Even at this late hour, we have 77 participants connected. So obviously, it is a very engaging discussion, keeping you hooked up, despite this late hour. So I want to just open it up. I think this discussion today in the two panels has raised a lot of euphoria, kind of the new technology, very exciting future. We can do this, that, all of that. And then also the downsides, potential downsides. And unless we are cognizant of the risks that it brings with it, and we take action to address them, we might be the losers at the end of the day. So I think these are the issues which have been raised by all of you, and I really am very grateful to all of you to put these issues on the table. So I want to just open it up for anybody who wants to raise some raised hand, and then I will go over. So I see three hands already on the screen.
Let me begin not with the colleague from ISID first. Give me the floor to Professor Pati, and please be brief. So after that, I will come to some of my colleagues who have raised hands.
Yes, sir. Good evening to all of you. Sir, it is quite engaging to listen all the presenters. It is really illuminating for me, and I hope for all of us. Sir, my just one piece of information I require, or maybe confirmation from the panelists, that when we go for this technology upgradation and after 1 to 4, we are moving all over the world, we found that there is a gap in the bottom of the pyramid and top of the pyramid. Then if that gap is really getting wider and wider, then how does this technology upgradation or the movement of technology from 1.0 to 4.0 is really serving the human development? Are we really developing, or we are really going back to something else? That is my concern, and I want maybe some clarification on this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I see another hand raised by Professor Ananya Ghosh Dastidar. Ananya, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I must say, I mean, this is such a learning experience. Thank you so much for inviting me and having this. I just wanted, your comments on the panelists' comments on 2 points which occurred to me. Professor Mani raised this issue of how so much of what we are publishing is indigenous. There is no foreign collaboration. Could this possibly be the result of what I have always seen as a somewhat lopsided investment in human capital that we undertook since post-independence? Our investment was focused on higher education rather than primary education. So the fact that we are able to independently develop technology is it possibly due to, in some sense, that lopsided investment which occurred then? That was one. And second, what Anand raised, the point he raised about inequality with respect to access to technology. So I am in the education sector. I'm in the University of Delhi, and we've just seen this. I mean, education is not directly to do with manufacturing, but of course we're the labor force providers. So there is a real risk of marginalization if you look at those whose parents are uneducated, and those who are poor, those who are losing their jobs. Their access to online education is so sort of skewed, and it's really sad to see how without the kind of help that the more privileged children have at home, the quality of online education has really suffered, and we really must even at that level sort of do something to balance this out, balance this access to digital technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me then turn to my colleagues, Sanjay Malik, then Sangeeta, then Akhilesh. So Sanjay, over to you.
Hello.
Quick.
Hello. I really enjoyed all the panelists, all the speakers. So I have my question. From my question, I may sound very pessimistic. I have don't disagreement. It is going to affect the labor very badly. But my question is that what I understood the Indian industry as we have been the follower of the technology what has been produced elsewhere in Western world. Basically, we try to emulate. We are the we try to emulate the technology what is developed in elsewhere in Western developed country. So basically, we are the users. So if you try to evaluate what we stand with respect to this technology, all these three industrial revolutions, if we see whether we really reach the third industrial revolution, that is need to question ourselves that where we are. If you see the kind of thing we have, we still have we don't invest more than 1% of our GDP in R&D, and also we are still the follower of the technology. Now now this technology, basically AI, since it is based on the data, basically the big data, if we could produce the technology and then we can use them according to our uses, then we can be better. We can harness this the potential of Industry 4. And the way that China and South Korea are doing, that if we could produce the technology, then we can also discuss in the second panel, he discuss all the potential damage that we are thinking that we can curtail. If we started becoming the producer, because we understand our situation, we'll produce accordingly, then we can reduce the damages of the Industry 4 and we can harness it. If we are not producer, if we still follower, we are not going to harness much of the benefit. Rather, we will kind of gather the damages or all the cost of this technology. Thank you.
Thank you. Sangeeta, over to you.
Hi. Thank you so much for this extremely enlightening discussion today. I'd like to point to three things. First, what Parminder raised about this forum actually talking about Industry 4 from a narrow to a broad sense. So that was really helpful. The second is what Professor Kamath spoke about and Professor Ananya. In fact, the pandemic has shown us that even for education, it is not just the generational aspect of being able as a parent to give education to our children in these times, but the mechanisms, the machines that are required, the technology that is required, that digital divide is really prominent and has actually worsened the kind of inequalities that we see in our societies. So that is something that is really worrisome for me, because I see that there is a turning of the clock in terms of reaching out to the more marginalized sections. At the same time, I would like to be thoughtful about this. Can Industry 4 and artificial intelligence and the use of technology do something for functions such as manual scavenging, where the use of manual labor in some sectors could be perhaps replaced by machines? So that's my sphere of optimism as far as machine technology comes into being, so that human tasks can be actually more simplified and dignified than before. I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Akhilesh, you have the floor.
Indeed, it was a very insightful discussion, and very new dimensions has been explored here. As some of the presenters had mentioned, that Industry 4 has the nature of centralization of the industrial power. So my concern is that if we are going to have the different kind of centralization, that is much more powerful than the earlier centralization. So monopolization will happen. So in that context, what will be the challenges before the small segments that are more diverse and more weaker in terms of the competition with the larger firms? So this is my question to the panelists. The other question is that even still today, the MSME segments are facing the technological upgradation problem. So if for the new type of technological upgradation, what type of challenges they will have, and how they will cope with this? And the another point which I would like to highlight is that I'm quite optimistic, particularly for the labor front. But giving the example of the previous industrialization, I'm sure that there will be the new opportunities, although there will be some losses of opportunity in the ongoing sector, ongoing activities, but definitely there will be new opportunities where we will find the employment opportunities. But can we visualize, can we think that what kind of new sectors where the employment opportunity will be available, so that our education system can think on and train the people accordingly? This is my
Thank you. Thank you, Akhilesh. So with that, I want to turn to our panelists and give them 1 minute each for their closing remarks, where they could address to any of the questions raised, or any closing thoughts, anything they want to share. Just 1 minute each, please. So let us begin with Clovis. Clovis, are you there? Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Nagesh. I would like to thank you very much. Very interesting. I would like just to say that it is true that these technological paradigms in developing countries are all there. It's like a bricolage, a patch of sectors in different paradigms at the same time. The thing is that all countries would face the downside of this new paradigm coming. You know, eventually we'll be users of those technologies and we'll have to mitigate potential unintended consequences, reduce these gaps, and those are related to reducing the socioeconomic gaps in the first place. So these new paradigms, they don't preclude the things, the homework that we have to do anyway, you know, deal with socioeconomic inequalities anyway. The thing is that if the country has not a strategic vision on how to insert into this new paradigm, and at the same time try to bridge that gap between the traditional and modern sector, it will not be able to benefit from the upside of this paradigm coming up. So I believe India was able to benefit a lot from ICT in certain aspects, but was not able to close the gaps, so was incomplete. So now with this potential new paradigm is this chance to do both things and benefit from the upside of that.
Thank you, Clovis. Over to you, Raja. Raja doesn't seem to be listening. Maybe I go to Sunil then. Sunil?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I will just specifically answer the point which Professor Dastidar raised. Basically, she was asking why the Indian science system is very less globalized, because most of the journal articles which are published are authored by Indians, not in collaboration with foreign researchers. And I agree with you that it may be due to the fact that for a very long period of time, we have been promoting this technological self-reliance, and we wanted to do everything on our own without in collaboration with foreigners. And we have come back to that again, once again, quite recently. And the downside of this is because the citation of our work, although I showed that the number of publications have increased very much, but the citation of our work is still quite poor, you know, and that's one of the reasons. And one of the reasons for that is because we are not collaborating with the right people abroad, and so the quality of our work is actually a casualty.
Thank you, Sunil. Is Raja back? No. So, Professor Amresh Chakrabarty, yes, you have 1 minute.
Okay, thank you. Actually, rather than responding to specific questions, I just want to share with you one story that might be of interest. And that's, I'm just sharing my slide one more time, a different one. This is one government initiative that has been given to IISc to create a common engineering facility center where one demonstrates how a smart factory would work. Yep. And this is not just, of course, with industrial initiative and so on, but I would like to just bring in that we are creating two different factories side by side. One is the usual Industry 4.0 initiative, where you have automation at the core. But in addition to that, next to it, we also have a labor-intensive platform. And the difference between the two is that while the top one has basically data-intensive machines and robots and collaborative robots and automated guided vehicles and so on, that is operating to create this productivity and so on. The bottom one is entirely driven by people using legacy machines and manual cranes and so on, where data layer is just added. But the elements of smart factory, which is the connectivity, the analytics, they are brought in there to see how a labor-intensive platform can also enhance its value add as it moves up. And most factories and industries, especially MSMEs, are more on this bottom side. And many of the factories are a hybrid of the two. So we have a platform around which we can do those experiments to see how they plan up. And just to share with you, there is an electronic manufacturing company we work with in Bangalore, where they have side by side a completely automated platform and a completely manual platform, because it doesn't make cost sense to run the automated platform unless the volume is beyond a certain number. Okay, so therefore, both of these are going to stay at least for a fair period of time in the future. And so within that, what we are creating is essentially, creating R&D projects, and both for the large companies as well as for along with the MSMEs, and training programs and so on, and awareness programs in multiple areas that are of interest, because we need to create our own capability. And with that, we have started an MTech in smart manufacturing, a PhD program in advanced manufacturing, a PG certification program for industry professionals in digital smart factories, a summer internship for getting a greater outreach, and an international conference in industry 4.0 and advanced manufacturing, which is going into the second plan. The idea is that we need to create that ecosystem in research and innovation within the country, not completely by isolating ourselves from the rest of the world, but by leveraging the competence that is out there in the rest of the world. Just as we're talking about industry 4.0 as connected intelligence, it is not limited to only goods and productions. It's also equally pervasive in research and knowledge creation, and that we need to take care of. Yeah. So thank you very much. That's what I wanted to add. This is one example of some of the technologies that are developed there. The digital twin on the top, the human virtual reality system, or the automated guided vehicle at the bottom. So, or a robot, for example, that can interact with people using eye gaze tracking and gesture control, just like we talk to each other. For example, Professor Nagesh is very worried that I'm taking too much time, and he is trying to browbeat me right now. This robot is actually able to do that in some sense. You can look at it and ask it to go to a place, and it can do that. We have a patent on this. So I'll stop with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chakravarti, for second presentation. In the closing remarks, very nice, very helpful. So let me turn to Uma. You want to have your last minute?
Yes, sure. I also want to respond to one of the questions raised by Sangeeta in the process, and also Anant, who had been talking. I think my point of intervention would be much more that how can you use technology in not an exploitative way, but much more in a way to improve the working conditions of the workers. And that could be done in various ways in terms of how the payments of wages are done, how working hours are monitored, or how social protection is given. I think Anand sort of talked about whether this technological revolution will bypass the marginalized. According to me, actually, it's not bypassing, it's precaritizing further the marginalized. And this is what you see whether you're talking about the domestic workers, taxi drivers, delivery workers today. And I think we could use this technology a bit more intelligently in ensuring the working conditions of the worker. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you. Let me turn to Satyaki.
So I will discuss 2 points. One is related to this question of inequality. But I would say that this has been documented already, that between countries inequality has declined over a period of time, but within countries inequality has increased. And this is precisely the point which is posing a challenge to the use of this new technology. Because if you are not able to diffuse this technology, if it is not made accessible, then this inequality is going to rise. Now, the problem is that we have very little room of technology choice, which we used to have in 20 or 30 years back. In a globalized world, you are facing a global market. And so we are forced to accept technologies in order to compete in the market as well. So you do not have much control of choosing which kind of technology is appropriate according to your endowments of raw materials and other inputs that you have. So in that case, what is important is that if you are having productivity gains, then how should you redistribute? And what I mentioned in my presentation, that this redistribution is not going to happen in conventional modes through market the way it happened in earlier industrial revolutions. You need to have a specific policy and different types of policies which we have never used earlier. So we need to think in terms of collaboration, in terms of production, as well as make the distribution process much more inclusive. And one information to Dr. Sangeeta that India is using AI technology for this manual scavenging. That I just got to know reading UNCTAD's recent report. They have reported that.
Yes, then let me turn to Parminder.
Okay, most of the questions were about dealing with marginality and the impact of technology, starting from Anand's presentation as such. And in the end, Akhilesh talked about decentralization. So I'll give a very activist response because this is directly to an activist, what happens to marginalization. And I think here we all who are worried about marginalization need to focus on the nature of the problem and hit where the iron is hot and what needs to be done. And that was what I was describing. There is a certain tendency of centralization of intelligence companies, intelligence mode of production, and we need to hit at the center. We tend to work in our areas of comfort, and if we keep on working on our areas of comfort, it will never get solved. So whether starting from the WTO, which we will use to decentralize the digital economy nation-wise, down within the nations to decentralize the concentrating nature of digital economy. We're trying to take up some initiatives, but I think we need to recognize the nature of the problem right now is to decentralize digital economy. And it would hit whether it's the job of sanitation worker or manual scavenger or other kinds of marginalization, caste-based, etc. So I think this is that old joke that we need to look for the coin where it is missing and not where the light is. So we shouldn't try to only be working in our areas of comfort, but look at the central problem of this concentration, which we try to solve together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me turn to Nupur.
Yeah, just not responding to any of the questions, but final comments is that if you look at whatever the initiatives that have been taken by the state or the state agencies, the kind of legal interventions that have been made, whether legislation or in terms of rules, all have focused on actually making a platform for data extraction. Right. So data extraction has been, you have to essentially the intervention of the state has been about creating policies for data extraction. In terms of data privacy or data protection, the legislation has been, as you know, it's there with the Parliamentary Committee for quite some time, right? And we see violations of privacy in terms of discrimination rapidly going up in terms of litigation. And you'll see that more and more happening if we do not have a legislation in place. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, to Anand, you have the final word.
Yeah. Three quick responses. First of all, thank you, Dr. Umarani, for actually addressing my question number 3, and that is, will the technologies assist in the reinforcement of exclusion or even new forms of subalternity and marginalization? Yes, new precaritization. I think that was just the dot-on answer to that question. So that's one thing. The second thing to Professor Ananya Dastidar about inequality in online education. Yes, it has been one of the most raging and most glaringly raging issues in the last 1.5 years. And what we see here is that it's not just, of course, you would know that much more than I do, that this is not just about device access. It's not just about the availability of a phone. As it is, they're struggling with general inequality, the impact of general inequality. That appends the technological inequality, and the final result is the compromise on education, which then affects mobility. So as it is, their parents are struggling. There is a gender divide also at home as to who gets the phone and if there is a phone at all. So there are so many issues which you've just captured in that nutshell. And yes, that's a very valid point for our day. And the last one from Dr. Sangeeta was about manual scavengers. I guess it just boils down to the question of what kind of progress we want from technology. Do we want device modernity and visual modernity, or do we want dignity and social justice through technology? May I say very strongly that this is not a binary choice. It is indeed possible to go ahead with device modernity and have social justice. It's just that where our priorities are. I think it just ends with that word.
Thank you very much. I think we need to really, conclude this very rich and very insightful session. I think I can't thank all our speakers of today enough. I think, this discussion has exceeded my expectations by a very wide, very big margin. And so for that, I'm really grateful to all of you. Since, 3 o'clock when we started with our chairman and Mr. Amitabh Kant and Dr. Rajendra Kumar, Mr. Sahani from CII, and all of the panelists in the 2 panels, you have provided very engaging and rich and insightful, thoughts, bringing together the whole gamut of issues that are impinging on this issue or this theme of Industry 4.0. I think we need to put together a report of this very rich discussion for further dissemination and to continue the debate. So it should not be seen as a one-off kind of event. So I'm sure we will remain engaged with all of you as we go along and discovering and understanding this technology and how we can harness it for India's development in true sense of the word, and not to be just excited about the hype it is creating, but its potential to uplift the society and the marginal sections of the society more than the others, more than the privileged ones. So with that, I want to really thank you all, and we will remain engaged and in touch with you. And all our, distinguished members of the audience, please, remain engaged. And I think this is the 3rd policy roundtable, in the series of monthly policy roundtables that we have started. So in June, we had one on FDI. In July, we had MSMEs. And today is the 3rd one, and we will continue this series to discuss threadbare the all different aspects of industrial development and their, link and connections with the true socio-economic development. So we'll continue, and please remain engaged, and we will remain engaged with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.